Before the name Dagoth struck fear across Morrowind, before the Golden Mask and the Blight, there was Vorin Dagoth, a respected Chimer noble, trusted counselor, and loyal friend. The transformation from esteemed House Dagoth noble to the self-proclaimed god beneath Red Mountain represents one of the most tragic and consequential falls in Tamrielic history. Born into House Dagoth, one of the great houses of the Chimer people, Vorin was raised among the nobility of ancient Rizdane, the land that would later become Morrowind. House Dagoth controlled territories primarily in the Vardenfell region, with holdings concentrated near what would later be known as the Ashlands and Maleg Amur. Unlike the more prominent houses Eindoril and Redoran, House Dagoth was smaller but respected for its ancient lineage and knowledge of mystical practices. Historical records from the First Era regarding Vorin's early life are fragmentary at best. The Ashlander oral traditions speak little of his youth, and tribunal temple accounts were heavily redacted following his betrayal. What remains clear is that Vorin distinguished himself through a combination of political acumen, magical aptitude, and unwavering loyalty to Chimer traditions. These qualities eventually brought him to the attention of Lord Eindoril Nerevar, the Hortator and military leader of the Chimer people. Nerevar recognized Vorin's talents and elevated him to the position of chief counselor and House Dagoth leader, making him part of the inner circle that would shape the destiny of the Chimer people. This inner circle included Nerevar's wife Almalexia, the warrior queen known for her fierce temperament and political shrewdness, Satha Sil, the reclusive mage whose intellect was unmatched among the Chimer, and Vivec, the warrior poet whose charisma and diplomatic skills complemented Nerevar's leadership. The relationship between Vorin and the three who would become the tribunal was complex from the beginning. Temple histories, written long after the events and heavily influenced by tribunal doctrine, portray minimal interaction between them. However, apocryphal texts and forbidden histories suggest a more nuanced dynamic. Vorin and Satha Sil shared an intellectual curiosity about the metaphysical, though their approaches differed fundamentally. Where Satha Sil sought to understand the workings of the universe through methodical study, Vorin was drawn to more intuitive and traditional interpretations of mysticism. With Almalexia, Vorin maintained a respectful but distant relationship. As Nerevar's wife and a powerful political figure in her own right, Almalexia commanded deference, but accounts suggest she never fully trusted the House Dagoth leader. Some scholars speculate this was due to Vorin's close relationship with Nerevar, perhaps even viewing him as a competing influence over her husband. The relationship between Vorin and Vivec was perhaps the most complex. Both served as close advisors to Nerevar, but their counsel often diverged. Where Vivec was adaptable and embraced change, Vorin was more conservative, advocating for adherence to ancient Chimer traditions. This fundamental difference would later manifest in their opposing views regarding the Dwemer and their artifacts. Before the conflicts that would eventually lead to the War of the First Council, these four individuals functioned as Nerevar's most trusted advisors, each bringing different perspectives to the challenges facing the Chimer people. Vorin's position as chief counselor gave him significant influence, though he appears to have used this power primarily to strengthen Nerevar's position rather than advance personal ambitions. The relative stability of this arrangement was disrupted by the increasing tensions between the Chimer and their technological neighbors, the Dwemer. The discovery that the Dwemer chief engineer Kagranak was working on a secret project involving the Heart of Lorkhan, an artifact of immense divine power, changed everything. Vorin was among the first to express concern about Dwemer activities beneath Red Mountain, a position that aligned with his traditional reverence for the Daedric princes the Chimer worshipped. When diplomatic efforts failed and the War of the First Council erupted between the Chimer and Dwemer, Vorin demonstrated unwavering loyalty to Nerevar. He led House Dagoth forces in several key battles, proving himself not just a counselor but a capable military commander. Accounts from this period describe him as resolute, unflinching, and devoted to the Hortator's cause. His tactical contributions were particularly valuable in the mountainous regions of Vardenfell, where his house's knowledge of the terrain provided strategic advantages. As the conflict intensified, Nerevar made a critical decision that would ultimately set the stage for tragedy. He entrusted Vorin with a special responsibility to secure the entrance to the Dwemer facility beneath Red Mountain, where Kagrenac conducted his experiments with the heart of Lorkhan. This assignment demonstrated the immense trust Nerevar placed in his chief counselor, as it involved guarding what would prove to be the most consequential site in Morrowind's history. While Nerevar, accompanied by Almalexia, Satha Sil, and Vivec, negotiated with the Dwemer king Dumak elsewhere, Vorin remained vigilant at his post. What transpired during this period of guardianship is where historical accounts begin to diverge dramatically, forming one of the great controversies in Tamrielic history. According to the official Tribunal Temple version, Vorin betrayed his oath by entering the Forbidden Chambers, where he encountered the heart of Lorkhan and Kagrenac's tools, the artifacts designed to harness the heart's divine power. Tempted by the prospect of godhood, he allegedly attempted to draw power from the heart, but lacked the knowledge to do so properly, resulting in his corruption. Ashlander oral traditions tell a different story. In their version, Vorin faithfully executed his duty as guardian. When he discovered Dwemer engineers attempting to access the heart chamber, he intervened and was exposed to the heart's influence during the confrontation. This exposure began a transformation that was neither sought nor initially understood. A third account, found in the heretical text, Nerevar at Red Mountain, suggests that Vorin entered the chamber out of necessity when he detected unusual energy emanations following the mysterious disappearance of the entire Dwemer race. In this version, his exposure to the heart was an act of investigation rather than ambition. What seems consistent across these contradictory narratives is that Vorin was the first of Nerevar's inner circle to encounter the heart after the Dwemer vanished, and this encounter fundamentally changed him. The exact nature of this change, whether immediate corruption, gradual influence, or something more nuanced, remains disputed. When Nerevar and the future tribunal members arrived at the heart chamber, they found Vorin altered, though accounts differ on how severely. The tribunal version claims he was already mad with power and had to be subdued. Ashlander accounts suggest he was disoriented but lucid, warning Nerevar about the dangers of the artifacts. The most controversial moment came when Nerevar consulted with Vorin about what should be done with Kagrenac's tools and the heart. According to Ashlander traditions, Vorin counseled that these artifacts were dangerous and should be destroyed or secured away from mortal hands, a position that directly contradicted the ambitions of Almalexia, Satha Sil, and Vivec, who saw the potential for using the tools themselves. This disagreement created the fatal rift in Nerevar's inner circle. The Tribunal Temple histories claim Vorin's counsel was self-serving, as he had already been corrupted and wished to maintain exclusive access to the heart. Ashlander accounts portray his position as principled, based on reverence for the Daedric princes and concern about mortals wielding divine power. Nerevar initially sided with Vorin, ordering that the tools be secured and not used. He commanded his counselor to remain as guardian while he consulted with the Daedric prince Azura for guidance. This decision effectively placed Vorin in opposition to the future tribunal, creating tensions that would never be resolved. What happened next is perhaps the most contested event in Morrowind's history. Nerevar returned from his consultation with Azura, reportedly reinforced in his conviction that the tools should not be used. A confrontation occurred in the heart chamber, but accounts of this confrontation vary so dramatically that extracting truth from myth becomes nearly impossible. The Tribunal Temple teaches that Vorin attacked Nerevar out of corrupted ambition, forcing the Hortator to strike down his once loyal friend. In their version, Vorin was defeated but not destroyed, his essence bound to the heart in a weakened state from which he would later re-emerge as Dagoth-Ur. Ashlander traditions tell that Nerevar and Vorin were both betrayed by the future tribunal, who coveted the power of the heart. In some versions, Vorin witnessed the tribunal's murder of Nerevar and was then defeated when he tried to avenge his lord. In others, both were overcome by the combined might of Almalexia, Satha Sil, and Vivec. A third possibility, suggested in obscure texts recovered from Telvanni archives, is that the heart itself influenced events, creating confusion and conflict among those present as a means of ensuring its continued existence and influence in the world. What is historically verifiable is that following these events, Vorin Dagoth was believed dead or destroyed. House Dagoth was disbanded and its members persecuted, and the tribunal ascended to godhood using the very tools that had been the subject of the dispute. Azura, enraged at what she viewed as betrayal, transformed the Chimer into the Dunmer, changing their skin to ash gray and their eyes to fiery red as a permanent reminder of their ancestors' deeds. For centuries, Vorin Dagoth was remembered only as a traitor in official histories, his name becoming synonymous with betrayal. House Dagoth was stricken from the records of the great houses, its holdings distributed among the victors, primarily House Indral, which was closely associated with the new tribunal temple. Yet beneath Red Mountain, something of Vorin remained, bound to the heart in ways not fully understood by the tribunal. This remnant, slowly gathering strength over centuries, would eventually re-emerge as the being known as Dagoth-Ur, whose ambitions and powers would threaten not just the tribunal's divinity, but all of Morrowind. The transformation from Vorin Dagoth to Dagoth-Ur represents more than a change in name. It signifies a fundamental alteration of identity, purpose, and power. The loyal counselor who once served Nerevar with distinction became unrecognizable, his original personality subsumed by something new and terrible. Whether this transformation was the result of corruption, revenge, or something more complex remains one of the great mysteries of the Dwemer's legacy. The growing tensions between the Chimer and Dwemer reached their breaking point in the late Merethic era. What began as philosophical disagreements about the nature of divinity evolved into outright hostility as Dwemer excavations beneath Red Mountain intensified. By 1E668, the first skirmishes of what would become the War of the First Council had erupted in the borderlands between Chimer and Dwemer territories. Kagrenac, chief tonal architect of the Dwemer, had discovered the heart of Lorkhan beneath Red Mountain decades earlier. This divine artifact, the literal heart of a dead god, represented unprecedented power. The Dwemer scientist had crafted specialized tools to harness this power: Sunder, Keening, and Wraithguard. These implements were designed to tap into the heart's divine energy through tonal manipulation, the signature magical methodology of Dwemer metaphysics. As hostilities escalated, intelligence reached Nerevar about the true nature of Kagrenac's work. Vorin Dagoth, utilizing his extensive network of spies throughout Vardenfell, provided the first concrete evidence of the Dwemer's intentions. In 1E700, Vorin presented his findings to the Chimer Leadership Council. The Dwemer seek to create a new god from the heart of Lorkhan, he reportedly told Nerevar and his counselors. Kagrenac works to bind the Dwemer race to the heart, transforming them into a singular divine entity that would transcend mortality. This revelation horrified the Daedra worshipping Chimer. To them, such an act represented the ultimate blasphemy, not merely rejecting the Daedric princes, but attempting to supplant them. Nerevar, hoping to avoid bloodshed, sought a diplomatic solution first. He traveled to Dumac's fortress with a small entourage to confront his former friend about Kagrenac's project. The meeting quickly deteriorated. Dumac, either genuinely unaware of the full scope of Kagrenac's work or unwilling to acknowledge it, dismissed Nerevar's concerns. Heated words gave way to drawn weapons. The personal confrontation between the two leaders mirrored the larger conflict between their peoples, and any hope for peaceful resolution vanished. Nerevar returned to his forces and mobilized for full-scale war. The Chimer armies marched toward Red Mountain, with House Dagoth warriors forming a significant portion of the vanguard. Vorin himself commanded his house troops, displaying tactical acumen that complemented Nerevar's strategic brilliance. The Dwemer, despite their smaller numbers, countered with their technological superiority, animunculi war machines, enchanted weapons, and fortifications that seemed impenetrable. The early battles favored the Dwemer. Their steam-powered centurions devastated Chimer infantry formations, while their crossbow-equipped defenders repelled assaults on their fortresses. The Chimer responded by adapting their tactics, utilizing magic to disable Dwemer constructs, and employing guerrilla strategies in the ashlands surrounding Red Mountain. As the conflict intensified, Nerevar made a fateful decision. Recognizing that the true threat lay beneath Red Mountain in Kagrenac's laboratory, he assembled an elite strike force to penetrate the Dwemer defenses and reach the heart chamber directly. This force included Nerevar himself, the future tribunal members, and a contingent of House Dagoth warriors led by Vorin. The assault on Red Mountain occurred during a major Dwemer religious observance, when many of their soldiers were gathered in ceremonial halls rather than at their posts. Whether this timing was coincidence or the result of intelligence provided by Vorin's spies remains debated by historians. Regardless, the Khmer force breached the outer defenses with minimal resistance. As they pushed deeper into the mountain, however, resistance stiffened. Dwemer automatons guarded the inner passages, and elite Dwemer warriors engaged the Khmer in the narrow corridors. The fighting was brutal and close-quartered, with significant casualties on both sides. During this phase of the battle, Nerevar made another crucial decision that would have far-reaching consequences. Concerned that Kagrenac might use the heart as a last resort if cornered, Nerevar split his forces. He instructed Vorin to take his House Dagoth warriors and secure the entrance to the heart chamber, preventing anyone from entering until Nerevar could confront Dumak and Kagrenac personally. Almalexia, Satha Sil, and Vivek accompanied Nerevar as he pressed forward to find the Dwemer king. What transpired next created the greatest historical controversy in Morrowind's history, with at least 3 contradictory accounts surviving into the Third Era. According to the Tribunal Temple's official history, Nerevar confronted and defeated Dumak in single combat, mortally wounding the Dwemer king. During this confrontation, Kagrenac, in desperation, used his tools upon the heart, causing the instantaneous disappearance of the entire Dwemer race across Tamriel. When Nerevar and the future tribunal members arrived at the heart chamber, they found Vorin Dagoth had disobeyed orders, entered the chamber himself, and begun experimenting with the tools, having already been corrupted by proximity to the heart. The Ashlander account, preserved in oral tradition despite centuries of tribunal persecution, tells a significantly different story. In their version, Nerevar and Dumak indeed fought, but their battle was interrupted by the sudden disappearance of the Dwemer. Investigating this phenomenon, Nerevar and his companions found Vorin guarding the heart chamber as instructed. Vorin reported that Kagrenac had used his tools on the heart in a final desperate act as the Khmer forces breached the inner sanctum, resulting in the Dwemer's vanishing. A third account comes from the heretical text, the Battle of Red Mountain, attributed to Vivek but suppressed by the temple. This version suggests that the Dwemer disappearance occurred before Nerevar's confrontation with Dumak was resolved, creating confusion on both sides. In the aftermath, Vorin discovered the tools near the heart and protected them until Nerevar's arrival, but exposure to the heart's emanations had already begun affecting his mind. What all accounts agree upon is that following the Dwemer's disappearance, Nerevar, the future tribunal, and Vorin Dagoth stood in the heart chamber facing a momentous decision about Kagrenac's tools and the heart of Lorkhan. Vorin advocated strongly for the immediate destruction of the tools. These implements caused the downfall of the Dwemer, he reportedly argued. They are an affront to the Daedra we worship, and too dangerous for any mortal to wield. Some sources suggest he went further, claiming the tools had communicated with him, revealing their true danger. Satha Sil, fascinated by the metaphysical implications, countered that the tools represented knowledge that could benefit the Khmer people if properly studied. Almalexia emphasized the practical benefits. With such power, they could protect their people from future threats. Vivek, characteristically, took a middle position, suggesting the tools be preserved but carefully controlled. The disagreement intensified, with Vorin growing increasingly agitated about the others' interest in preserving the tools. Nerevar, troubled by the discord among his closest advisors, declared that he would seek guidance from Azura before making a final decision. He instructed Vorin to continue guarding the heart chamber and the tools while he and the others retreated to perform the necessary rituals to commune with the Daedric prince. What happened during Nerevar's absence from the heart chamber is where accounts become irreconcilably contradictory. The Tribunal Temple maintains that Vorin, left alone with the tools in the heart, succumbed to temptation. He allegedly used the tools to draw power from the heart, but without proper knowledge, this attempt corrupted him. When Nerevar returned, Vorin, now calling himself Dagoth-Ur, attacked his former lord. Nerevar was forced to defeat his friend in combat, apparently killing him, though his essence remained bound to the heart. Ashlander tradition tells that Nerevar returned from communing with Azura, convinced the tools should be destroyed or secured away from mortal hands. This decision angered Almalexia, Satha Sil, and Vivek, who had already begun formulating plans to use the tools themselves. According to this account, the three conspired to murder Nerevar and then attacked Vorin when he tried to stop them or witness their betrayal. The apocryphal Kagranak's secret text presents yet another possibility, that the heart itself influenced events, creating paranoia and conflict among those present. This text suggests that Vorin was the first to fall under its influence due to his extended proximity while guarding the chamber, but that all present were affected to varying degrees, clouding their judgment and inflaming their ambitions. The immediate aftermath saw Vorin Dagoth defeated, apparently destroyed, and his house disbanded. The official history claims he was struck down for his betrayal, while Ashlander tradition maintains he was overpowered after witnessing Nerevar's murder or trying to prevent the future tribunal from seizing the tools. A third possibility, found in obscure texts recovered from Telvanni archives, suggests that Vorin was not killed but banished, his spirit bound to the heart in a weakened state from which he could not immediately return. What is historically verifiable is that following these events, the tribunal, Almalexia, Satha Sil, and Vivek took possession of Kagranak's tools. Despite Azura's warnings against using them, they performed rituals at the heart, drawing divine power and transforming themselves into living gods. Azura, enraged by what she viewed as betrayal of Nerevar's wishes, appeared before them and prophesied their eventual downfall. As a mark of her displeasure, she transformed the golden-skinned Chimer into the ash-skinned, red-eyed Dunmer. The tribunal's first act as self-proclaimed gods was to consolidate their power. They established the tribunal temple with themselves as its central deities, systematically suppressing alternative accounts of Red Mountain and elevating their version to religious doctrine. House Dagoth was stricken from the great houses, its members persecuted, and its holdings distributed primarily to House Indral, which became closely associated with the temple. For centuries, most Dunmer accepted the temple's account without question. Vorin Dagoth was remembered as the arch-traitor, his name synonymous with betrayal. Only the Ashlanders, maintaining their nomadic lifestyle and oral traditions apart from temple influence, preserved alternative narratives. Unknown to the tribunal or their followers, however, Vorin Dagoth, or what remained of him, was not truly destroyed. Beneath Red Mountain, bound to the heart of Lorkhan in ways not fully understood, his essence persisted. The tribunal's periodic returns to the heart chamber to renew their divine powers inadvertently provided small amounts of energy that gradually restored Dagoth-Ur's strength. By 2 882, nearly 3,500 years after the Battle of Red Mountain, Dagoth-Ur had regained enough power to establish a conscious presence in the heart chamber. When the tribunal arrived for their renewal ritual, they found their former companion awake and waiting, stronger than they had anticipated and immune to the powers they had gained from the same source. This confrontation forced the tribunal to retreat and marked the beginning of a new conflict that would eventually threaten their divinity and all of Morrowind. The Battle of Red Mountain thus stands as not merely a historical event, but the fulcrum upon which Morrowind's religious, political, and cultural identity balanced for millennia. The transformation of Vorin Dagoth into Dagoth-Ur, the ascension of the tribunal, and the conversion of the Chimer into Dunmer all stemmed from decisions made in the heart chamber. The contradictory accounts of these events reflect not just historical uncertainty, but active suppression and manipulation of history by those who emerged victorious. In the aftermath of the Battle of Red Mountain, as the newly transformed Dunmer people adjusted to their ashen skin and fiery eyes, a presence lingered beneath the volcanic mountain. Vorin Dagoth, now Dagoth-Ur, had not been destroyed as the tribunal claimed. The exact nature of his survival remains one of the great mysteries of Tamrielic metaphysics, though several theories have emerged from scholarly study. The most credible explanation lies in the unique properties of the heart of Lorkhan itself. As the literal heart of a dead god, the artifact existed partially outside conventional reality. When Dagoth-Ur was defeated in the heart chamber, his spirit became bound to the heart through a metaphysical tether. The tribunal, lacking complete understanding of the heart's nature, believed him destroyed when in fact he had entered a state of suspended animation, a dreamlike existence neither fully conscious nor truly dead. During this dormant period, Dagoth-Ur existed primarily as a diffuse consciousness spread throughout the chambers beneath Red Mountain. His physical form had been destroyed, but his essence persisted in the volcanic gases, ash, and stone surrounding the heart. Magical examinations of Red Mountain's emanations, conducted by House Telvanni Mage's centuries, later detected trace patterns consistent with a distributed sentience, though these findings were suppressed by temple authorities. The tribunal's own actions inadvertently contributed to Dagoth-Ur's eventual return. Following their apotheosis, Almalexia, Sothasil, and Vivek established a ritual cycle whereby they would return to the heart chamber periodically to renew their divine powers. These renewal ceremonies typically occurred once per Dunmer generation, approximately every 80 years, though historical records indicate some variations based on political circumstances and the tribunal members' individual needs. The renewal ritual itself was a closely guarded secret, known only to the three themselves. Based on fragments of Sothasil's notes recovered from his Clockwork City, the process involved using Kagranak's tools, Sunder, Keening, and Wraithguard, to draw fresh divine energy from the heart. The tools served as conduits, channeling the heart's power into the tribunal's transformed bodies, reinforcing the divine spark they had originally claimed in 1E700. What the tribunal failed to realize was that each renewal ritual created metaphysical disturbances that stirred Dagoth-Ur's dormant consciousness. The same energies that renewed their divinity provided small infusions of power to the slumbering entity bound to the heart. Each ceremony left a residual connection that Dagoth-Ur's dispersed consciousness could gradually exploit, drawing minute amounts of power even between the tribunal's visits. For nearly 3,500 years, this process continued slowly, with Dagoth-Ur gathering strength imperceptibly. The tribunal, preoccupied with governing Morrowind and establishing their divine cult, remained unaware of the growing threat beneath Red Mountain. Their periodic returns to the heart chamber revealed nothing unusual, as Dagoth-Ur's consciousness remained too diffuse to manifest physically or make its presence known. The first tangible sign of Dagoth-Ur's reawakening came in 2E572, during the Akaviri invasion of Morrowind. As the tribunal focused their divine powers on repelling the foreign threat, witnesses near Red Mountain reported increased volcanic activity and strange dreams featuring a golden masked figure speaking in riddles. Temple records dismissed these accounts as stress reactions to the invasion, but internal communications between Vivek and Sothasil expressed concern about resonances from the heart chamber that seemed discordant with established patterns. Following the Akaviri invasion, Sothasil conducted a more thorough examination of the heart chamber during the next renewal ritual. His arcane measurements detected anomalous energy patterns surrounding the heart, though he attributed these to natural fluctuations rather than an external influence. This misdiagnosis gave Dagoth-Ur additional time to strengthen his position undetected. By 2E882, Dagoth-Ur had accumulated sufficient energy to reconstitute a physical form, albeit a limited one. When the tribunal arrived for their standard renewal ritual, they found their former companion waiting for them in the heart chamber. Historical accounts of this first confrontation are sparse, as the tribunal kept the matter secret to prevent public panic. Vivek's private journals, partially recovered from the flooded ruins of his library after the Red Year, described the encounter. The chamber held a presence we had thought long banished. A form both familiar and alien greeted us, Vorin, yet not Vorin. His physical manifestation was incomplete, spectral in places, solid in others, but his voice carried the unmistakable resonance of one who has touched divinity. He named himself Dagoth-Ur now, and claimed kinship with the heart we had long thought ours alone. This first encounter ended in a standoff rather than direct conflict. The tribunal, taken by surprise and uncertain of their former companion's capabilities, withdrew to assess the situation. Dagoth-Ur, still regaining his strength, made no immediate move to stop them. This meeting marked the beginning of what scholars would later call the first phase of Dagoth-Ur's return, a period characterized by gradual power consolidation beneath Red Mountain with minimal external manifestations. Following this encounter, the tribunal altered their approach to the renewal rituals. Rather than all three visiting together, they began taking turns, with two maintaining vigilance in the outside world while the third attempted to access the heart. This strategy proved increasingly difficult as Dagoth-Ur's control over the inner chambers of Red Mountain strengthened. By 2E890, he had established a defensive perimeter of ash creatures and corrupted beasts that the tribunal had to fight through to reach the heart. The most significant development during this period was Dagoth-Ur's discovery that he could extend his consciousness beyond his physical form while sleeping. This ability allowed him to establish tenuous mental connections with sleeping Dunmer across Vardenfell. These connections manifested primarily as dreams, strange, compelling visions featuring a golden masked figure speaking of a coming transformation and the falsehood of the tribunal gods. The temple initially dismissed reports of these dreams as superstitious nonsense or Daedric mischief. By the early Third Era, however, the pattern had become too widespread to ignore. Dream records collected by temple missionaries showed consistent imagery across diverse populations. The Golden Mask, Red Mountain erupting with golden light rather than ash, and whispered promises of a new unity for the Dunmer people. Dagoth-Ur's ability to influence dreams operated through several metaphysical mechanisms. First, his connection to the heart of Lorkhan, a divine artifact that existed partially outside normal time and space, allowed his consciousness to extend beyond conventional limitations. Second, the Dunmer people's cultural and spiritual connection to their homeland created subconscious receptivity to emanations from beneath Red Mountain. Finally, Dagoth-Ur discovered that certain individuals possessed greater sensitivity to his dream sending, particularly those with ancestral ties to House Dagoth or those born under specific birth signs. These dream connections served multiple purposes in Dagoth-Ur's gradual return to power. They allowed him to identify potential servants across Vardenfell, planting subtle suggestions that would draw particularly susceptible individuals toward Red Mountain. The dreams also spread seeds of doubt about the tribunal's divinity, undermining temple authority in subtle ways that would not trigger immediate crackdowns. Perhaps most importantly, the dream connections created a diffuse network of unconscious energy that Dagoth-Ur could draw upon, supplementing the power he siphoned from the heart. By 3E400, approximately a century before the events that would bring the Nerevarine to Morrowind, Dagoth-Ur had established a significant presence beneath Red Mountain. His physical form had fully reconstituted, though he remained bound to the vicinity of the Heart Chamber. More concerning to the tribunal was his ability to extend his will through intermediaries, the first Ash vampires, immortal servants created from his most loyal followers. These Ash vampires, bearing names like Dagoth-Gars and Dagoth-Adros, became his instruments in the wider world. They established the first shrines within the Ghost Fence, recruited cultists from among those most affected by the dream sending, and began early experiments with Corpus disease, a supernatural blight that would later become Dagoth-Ur's primary weapon against the tribunal and Morrowind as a whole. The development of Corpus represented a significant evolution in Dagoth-Ur's power. This supernatural disease, transmitted through both physical contact and airborne spores, caused horrific physical transformations in its victims. Those infected experienced extreme physical distortions, tumorous growths, elongated limbs, and in advanced cases, complete loss of recognizable form. More insidiously, the disease granted a form of immortality while gradually eroding the victim's mind, eventually replacing their consciousness with extensions of Dagoth-Ur's will. Corpus was not merely a weapon, but a manifestation of Dagoth-Ur's ultimate ambition, the creation of a unified Dunmer consciousness connected directly to him and through him to the heart of Lorkhan. In his distorted worldview, shaped by millennia of communion with the heart, this divine disease represented transcendence rather than corruption. Each infected individual became part of what he called the Sixth House family, a collective consciousness that prefigured his planned transformation of all Morrowind. The tribunal recognized the existential threat posed by Corpus and Dagoth-Ur's growing power. In 3E417, they undertook a coordinated assault on Red Mountain, attempting to reach the heart chamber and permanently sever Dagoth-Ur's connection to the heart. This campaign, led personally by all three tribunal members, initially made significant progress. They breached the outer defenses and penetrated deep into the network of caverns beneath the mountain. However, the assault ended in disaster. Dagoth-Ur had prepared for their attack, setting metaphysical traps that disrupted the tribunal's divine powers. More significantly, during the battle, he managed to capture Sunder and Keening, two of Kagranak's tools essential for proper interaction with the heart. With the tribunal forced to retreat, and two of the three tools now in Dagoth-Ur's possession, the balance of power shifted dramatically. Following this setback, the tribunal constructed the Ghost Fence, a massive magical barrier surrounding Red Mountain, designed to contain Dagoth-Ur's influence. Powered directly by the divine energy of the tribunal, the Ghost Fence successfully limited the physical spread of Corpus and prevented Dagoth-Ur's ash vampires from freely traversing Vardenfell. However, it could not block the Dream Sending, which continued to spread his influence in subtle ways. By 3E427, when the events of the Third Era's prophecies began to unfold, Dagoth-Ur had established complete dominance within Red Mountain. His consciousness had expanded to control a network of followers both inside and outside the Ghost Fence. The tribunal, unable to renew their powers properly without access to the tools, experienced gradually diminishing divinity. Cracks had begun to appear in the Ghost Fence, allowing Corpus to spread into surrounding regions, while Sixth House bases established footholds in settlements across Vardenfell. What had begun as a slumbering, barely conscious presence had evolved into the greatest threat Morrowind had faced since the Akaviri invasion. The dormant seed planted at the Battle of Red Mountain had grown into a power that rivaled the tribunal themselves, a divine force with its own vision for Morrowind's future, and the means to implement that vision through dream, disease, and devoted followers. The stage was thus set for the fulfillment of Azura's prophecy, the return of Nerevar reborn to challenge both the false gods of the tribunal and the dark ambitions of Dagoth-Ur. The slumbering threat had fully awakened, and the consequences of events set in motion thousands of years earlier would soon reshape Morrowind forever. The Second Era drew to a close with a development that would forever alter the balance of power in Morrowind. In 2E882, after centuries of dormancy beneath Red Mountain, Dagoth-Ur's consciousness fully awakened. The periodic renewal rituals performed by the tribunal had inadvertently provided him with the energy needed to reconstitute his essence, culminating in a moment that shocked the self-proclaimed gods of Morrowind. When the tribunal arrived for their standard renewal ceremony at the Heart Chamber, they found not the empty cavern they expected, but a partially manifested figure waiting for them. Dagoth-Ur's form was not yet completely physical. Parts of him remained translucent and smoke-like, while others had solidified into recognizable features. Most striking was the golden mask he wore, crafted from his own divine will rather than physical materials, its surface reflecting the crimson glow of the heart of Lorkhan. The confrontation was brief but consequential. Dagoth-Ur's powers, though still developing, proved surprisingly formidable. He managed to repel the tribunal's initial attacks, demonstrating an innate connection to the heart that rivaled their own. More concerning to Almalexia, Satha Sil, and Vivek was his apparent immunity to the divine abilities they had wielded unchallenged for millennia. The tribunal retreated to reassess their strategy, but this initial encounter marked a fundamental shift in Morrowind's metaphysical landscape. Dagoth-Ur had established direct control over the immediate vicinity of the Heart Chamber, forcing the tribunal to fight their way through to perform their renewal rituals. With each passing year, his influence expanded outward through the caverns of Red Mountain, making access increasingly difficult. In the decade following his reawakening, Dagoth-Ur focused on consolidating his power and developing his unique connection to the heart. Unlike the tribunal, who used Kagranak's tools to draw divine energy in discrete ceremonies, Dagoth-Ur's bond with the heart had become continuous and symbiotic. This connection allowed him to channel divine power constantly, albeit initially at a lower intensity than the tribunal could achieve during their renewal rituals. Perhaps the most significant development of this period was Dagoth-Ur's creation of the Ash Vampires around 2E890. These beings represented a metaphysical innovation unprecedented in Tamrielic history, extensions of Dagoth-Ur's own divine essence given independent form. The process began with his most devoted followers, Dunmer, who had been drawn to Red Mountain through his dream sending. These individuals underwent a transformation more profound than mere physical change. Dagoth-Ur literally infused them with portions of his own divine essence. The resulting Ash Vampires, bearing names like Dagoth-Odros, Dagoth-Vemin, and Dagoth-Gars, were neither truly separate beings nor simple extensions of their master. They existed in a state of metaphysical symbiosis with Dagoth-Ur, sharing aspects of his consciousness while maintaining limited autonomy. This arrangement created a network of divine power centered on Dagoth-Ur, but distributed throughout Red Mountain. Each Ash Vampire manifested unique abilities reflecting aspects of Dagoth-Ur's own power. Some demonstrated exceptional control over ash and stone, shaping the very substance of Red Mountain to their will. Others specialized in dream manipulation, extending Dagoth-Ur's influence through the sleeping minds of Vardenfell's inhabitants. All shared immortality derived from their connection to Dagoth-Ur, and through him, to the heart of Lorkhan. The creation of the Ash Vampires served multiple strategic purposes. They functioned as extensions of Dagoth-Ur's perception and will, allowing him to maintain awareness and influence throughout Red Mountain, even while his primary consciousness remained focused on the Heart Chamber. They also provided a defense in depth, ensuring that even if the Tribunal breached the outer regions of his domain, they would face increasingly powerful guardians as they approached the heart. Most importantly, the Ash Vampires could leave Red Mountain, acting as Dagoth-Ur's agents in wider Morrowind during the early period when he himself remained bound to the Heart's vicinity. Through these extensions of himself, he began establishing the first Sixth House bases beyond the mountain, recruiting cultists and spreading his influence in subtle ways that avoided direct confrontation with the Tribunal Temple. The relationship between Dagoth-Ur and his Ash Vampires illuminates much about his fundamental philosophy. Unlike the Tribunal, who maintained their separate identities and often pursued individual agendas, Dagoth-Ur envisioned a unified consciousness, a collective divine entity with himself at its center. The Ash Vampires represented the first implementation of this vision, a prototype for the transformation he ultimately planned for all Dunmer. As Dagoth-Ur's power grew, the Tribunal found their renewal rituals increasingly difficult to perform. By 3E36, early in Tiber Septim's reign, they were forced to battle through layers of Ash Vampires and lesser minions just to approach the Heart Chamber. These conflicts weakened them before they could even begin the renewal process, resulting in diminishing returns from each ceremony. The decisive shift in the balance of power came in 3E417. During an especially determined attempt to reach the heart, the Tribunal penetrated deeper into Red Mountain than they had managed in decades. However, Dagoth-Ur had prepared elaborate metaphysical traps along their path. As they navigated the twisting caverns, these traps disrupted the Tribunal's divine energies, temporarily weakening their powers. In the ensuing battle, Dagoth-Ur and his Ash Vampires launched a coordinated assault. The weakened Tribunal fought valiantly, but were overwhelmed by the combined might of their opponents. During the confusion, Dagoth-Ur seized both Sunder and Keening, two of the three tools created by Kagrenac to manipulate the heart. Only Wraithguard, worn by Vivek, escaped capture. This loss proved catastrophic for the Tribunal. Without the complete set of tools, they could no longer properly perform their renewal rituals. Though they retained significant divine power from previous ceremonies, they could not replenish it as it gradually diminished through use. Conversely, Dagoth-Ur gained access to tools specifically designed to channel the heart's energy, accelerating his own growth in power. With Sunder and Keening in his possession, Dagoth-Ur began experimenting with Kagrenac's methods. The Dwemer Tonal Architect had designed these tools for a specific purpose, the creation of a new god from the collective essence of the Dwemer race. Dagoth-Ur adapted this concept to his own ambitions, using the tools to refine his connection to the heart and enhance his ability to extend his divine essence into others. These experiments led directly to the development of Corpus disease in the early 4th century of the Third Era. Unlike conventional diseases caused by natural pathogens, Corpus represented a metaphysical contagion, divine energy from the heart, filtered through Dagoth-Ur's consciousness, manifested in physical form. Those infected experienced grotesque physical transformations. As their bodies attempted to accommodate divine power they were never designed to contain. The effects of Corpus varied widely depending on the infected individual's spiritual resilience and connection to Dagoth-Ur. Most victims degenerated into mindless Corpus beasts, their bodies bloated and distorted, their minds reduced to primitive aggression. A few, those particularly receptive to Dagoth-Ur's influence, retained their intelligence while gaining supernatural capabilities. These became the first ascended sleepers and ash poets, intelligent servants who spread Dagoth-Ur's philosophy throughout his growing cult. The creation of Corpus marked a significant evolution in Dagoth-Ur's strategy. Rather than merely opposing the tribunal or establishing his own cult, he now sought to fundamentally transform the Dunmer people on a physical and spiritual level. Each Corpus victim became part of his extended consciousness, a building block in the divine entity he intended to create with himself at its center. Simultaneously with these metaphysical developments, Dagoth-Ur began establishing the organizational structure of the Sixth House cult. The name itself carried powerful symbolic significance. House Dagoth had been the sixth great house of the Khmer before its destruction following the Battle of Red Mountain. By reclaiming this title, Dagoth-Ur positioned his movement as both a restoration of ancient legitimacy and a new beginning for Morrowind. The early Sixth House operated primarily through dreams and subtle influence. Dagoth-Ur identified susceptible individuals through dream sending, gradually drawing them into his service. Many of these early cultists were descendants of House Dagoth members who had escaped the purges following the Battle of Red Mountain, carrying a hereditary receptivity to their ancestral lord's influence. The cult structure mirrored traditional Dunmer Great House organization, with Dagoth-Ur as the unquestioned patriarch and the Ash vampires serving as his immediate family members. Below them, a hierarchy of increasingly devoted servants filled specialized roles. Ash poets composed dream verses carrying Dagoth-Ur's message to sleeping minds. Ascended sleepers served as field commanders and missionaries, establishing hidden shrines in abandoned strongholds and caves across Vardenfell. At the lowest levels were ordinary Dunmer, gradually falling under Sixth House influence. These individuals typically experienced a progression, beginning with strange dreams featuring the golden-masked figure of Dagoth-Ur. As their connection deepened, they developed physical symptoms, insomnia, skin discoloration, and eventually small growths resembling those of early-stage Corpus. Many maintained their ordinary lives during this process, serving as unwitting intelligence sources and vectors for spreading Sixth House influence. By 3E427, the Sixth House had established a network of bases throughout Vardenfell, particularly in the Ashlands and West Gash regions. These bases varied from small shrines hidden in ancestral tombs to elaborate complexes in remote locations. Each served as a focal point for Sixth House activities, recruiting new members, conducting rituals to strengthen Dagoth-Ur's influence, and in some cases, deliberately spreading Corpus to create new servants. The most significant of these bases was Kagorun, the ancient capital of House Dagoth before its destruction. Reclaimed by Dagoth-Odros and Dagoth-Vemin around 3E400, this sprawling stronghold became the primary Sixth House center outside Red Mountain itself. From Kagorun, Ash vampires coordinated operations across northern Vardenfell and conducted the most advanced experiments with Corpus outside Dagoth-Ur's direct supervision. The tribunal's response to these developments was hampered by their diminishing divine power and increasing internal conflicts. Without access to the heart for proper renewal, they were forced to conserve their remaining divine energy. Sotha Sil retreated to his Clockwork City, focusing on technological solutions to counter Dagoth-Ur's metaphysical advantages. Almalexia remained in Mournhold, increasingly paranoid about threats to her authority and distant from events in Vardenfell. Only Vivek maintained active opposition to the Sixth House, directing temple resources toward containing rather than defeating the threat. This containment strategy centered on the Ghost Fence, a massive magical barrier surrounding Red Mountain powered directly by the tribunal's divine energy. Completed around 3E420, the Ghost Fence successfully limited the physical movement of Corpus beasts and Sixth House agents. However, it could not block Dagoth-Ur's dream sending or prevent the establishment of Sixth House bases by cultists who had already left the mountain. More problematically, maintaining the Ghost Fence drained the tribunal's already diminishing power. With each passing year, more divine energy was required to sustain the barrier, as Dagoth-Ur's influence pressed against it from within. This created a strategic dilemma. Weakening the Ghost Fence would allow Sixth House forces to spread more rapidly, but maintaining it accelerated the decline of the tribunal's own divine strength. As the Third Era progressed toward its final decades, Dagoth-Ur refined his ultimate plan for Morrowind. Using the captured tools and his unique connection to the heart, he began constructing a new divine artifact beneath Red Mountain, Aculachin, the Second Numidium. Based on designs stolen from Kagranak's original plans for the Dwemer god Construct, Aculachin would serve as a physical extension of Dagoth-Ur's will, powered directly by the heart of Lorkhan. Unlike the Tribunal, whose divinity remained fundamentally separate from their mortal origins, Dagoth-Ur envisioned a transformation that would unify his consciousness with all Dunmer through Corpus, with Aculachin as the physical manifestation of this collective divine entity. In his distorted worldview, this represented the fulfillment of ancient Khymri destiny, a god born from the people themselves rather than imposed from without. By 3E427, when the events prophesied by Azura began to unfold, Dagoth-Ur stood at the threshold of implementing this plan. The tribunal's power continued to wane, the Ghost Fence showed increasing signs of weakness, and Sixth House influence had penetrated even the highest levels of house politics in Vardenfell. What had begun as a defeated spirit bound to the heart had become a fully realized divine entity with the potential to reshape Morrowind according to his own twisted vision. Dagoth-Ur's godhood stands as one of the most unusual divine manifestations in Tamrielic history, fundamentally different from both the Tribunal's engineered divinity and the natural godhood of Idra and Daedra. Unlike the Tribunal, who accessed the heart's power through ritualistic application of Kagranak's tools, Dagoth-Ur developed a symbiotic relationship with the heart itself, becoming an extension of its divine nature rather than merely drawing power from it. This distinction is crucial to understanding the metaphysical foundation of Dagoth-Ur's divinity. The Tribunal approached the heart as an external power source, methodically channeling its energy through the precise tonal manipulations encoded in Sunder and Keening, with Wraithguard serving as protection from the heart's raw divine emanations. Their godhood remained fundamentally separate from the heart. They were mortals enhanced by divine power, maintaining distinct identities and purposes. Dagoth-Ur's connection manifested differently. During his centuries of dormant existence bound to the heart, his consciousness gradually merged with the divine artifact. Telvanni metaphysicians who studied remnants of his power after his defeat described this relationship as divine osmosis, a gradual interpenetration of mortal and divine essence that transformed both. The heart influenced Dagoth-Ur's consciousness, infusing his thoughts and ambitions with aspects of Lorkhan's nature, while Dagoth-Ur's identity imprinted upon the heart's emanations, giving direction to its raw divine potential. This symbiotic relationship granted Dagoth-Ur abilities distinct from the Tribunal's powers, where their divinity required periodic renewal through ceremonial access to the heart. His connection remained constant, providing uninterrupted divine sustenance. This continuous flow of power, while initially weaker than the Tribunal's concentrated bursts of divinity, proved more stable over time, particularly after the Tribunal lost direct access to the heart. Examination of Sixth House shrines by Imperial battle mages revealed another unique aspect of Dagoth-Ur's divinity. Unlike the Tribunal Temple, where divine power flowed from the three to their followers through blessing and ritual, Sixth House worship operated as a circuit. Devotees did not merely receive blessings from Dagoth-Ur, they returned energy to him through dreams and devotion, creating a self-reinforcing system that strengthened both master and servant. The metaphysical implications of this arrangement become clearer when contrasted with traditional Edric and Daedric divinity. The Aedra achieved godhood through participation in the creation of Mundus, sacrificing much of their power in the process. Their divinity is fundamentally tied to the natural world, manifesting through physical laws and the rhythms of mortal existence. The Daedra, conversely, maintain their pre-creation power by refusing to participate in Mundus, preserving their autonomy and distinct identities at the cost of direct influence in the mortal realm. Dagoth-Ur represented something entirely different, a mortal who achieved godhood not through cosmic creation or primordial abstention, but through direct fusion with a divine artifact. The heart of Lorkhan, as the extracted center of an Edric entity, contained the concentrated essence of a being who was both creator and trickster. By merging with this artifact, Dagoth-Ur incorporated these contradictory aspects into his own nature, becoming simultaneously a creative and destructive force. This hybridized divinity manifested most visibly in Dagoth-Ur's dream-sending abilities. Dreams occupy a liminal space in Tamrilic metaphysics, neither fully material nor entirely spiritual. They bridge conscious thought and subconscious reality. The heart of Lorkhan, as the center of a god associated with limitation and mortal experience, naturally resonated with this dream state. By connecting to the heart, Dagoth-Ur gained unprecedented access to this realm, extending his consciousness across Vvardenfell through the dreams of its inhabitants. The mechanism of this dream sending reveals much about Dagoth-Ur's divine nature. Unlike Vermina, the Daedric prince whose dream manipulation remains external to mortal minds, Dagoth-Ur's dream presence emerged from within. His centuries-long communion with the heart had attuned him to the underlying rhythms of mortal consciousness in Morrowind, particularly among the Dunmer, whose ancestors had lived in proximity to the heart since the early Merethic era. This attunement allowed Dagoth-Ur to identify individuals particularly receptive to his influence, those with ancestral connections to House Dagoth, those born under certain sign constellations, or those whose personal traumas created psychological openings his consciousness could exploit. Through these receptive minds, he established initial footholds in the waking world, gradually expanding his influence through a network of increasingly devoted followers. The content of Dagoth-Ur's dream sending evolved over time, reflecting the development of his divine consciousness and strategic goals. Early dream manifestations, reported in temple records from the late Second Era, featured primarily symbolic imagery: the golden mask, red mountain erupting with light, and abstract sensations of transformation. As his power grew, these dreams became more coherent, eventually incorporating direct communication. By the late Third Era, sensitive individuals reported full conversations with the dream Dagoth, complete with philosophical arguments against the tribunal and promises of a transformed Morrowind. This progressive refinement of dream-sending paralleled Dagoth-Ur's developing control over the heart's power. In his early reawakening, his divine abilities manifested primarily as raw energy, the power to create ash vampires and repel the tribunal's attacks. As his understanding deepened, particularly after acquiring Sunder and Keening, he gained the ability to shape this energy with greater precision, leading to innovations like Corpus Disease and eventually the construction of Aculachan. Corpus itself represents perhaps the most profound expression of Dagoth-Ur's unique divinity. Neither a conventional disease nor a simple curse, Corpus embodied the fundamental contradiction at the heart of his divine nature. The disease simultaneously destroyed and transformed, killed and granted immortality, reduced minds to animal simplicity, and opened them to transcendent awareness. In metaphysical terms, Corpus represented divine energy incompletely translated into physical form, the power of the heart forced into mortal flesh that could not fully contain it. The effects of Corpus varied widely depending on the infected individual's spiritual resilience and connection to Dagoth-Ur. Most victims degenerated into mindless Corpus beasts, their bodies bloated and distorted as divine energy overwhelmed their physical forms. A few, those particularly receptive to Dagoth-Ur's influence, retained their intelligence while gaining supernatural capabilities, becoming ascended sleepers and ash poets who served as the intellectual vanguard of the Sixth House. This variation reflects a fundamental aspect of Dagoth-Ur's divine philosophy, the concept of the house unmourned. After his defeat at Red Mountain and the subsequent destruction of House Dagoth, the tribunal systematically erased his house from official history. Temples and monuments were dismantled, records altered or destroyed, and surviving family members persecuted until the once great house existed only in suppressed memories and forbidden texts. This erasure created what Dagoth-Ur came to see as a wound in Morrowind's cultural consciousness, a missing piece in the Dunmer identity. Through his reawakening and the establishment of the Sixth House cult, Dagoth-Ur positioned himself not merely as a returning god, but as the restorer of this broken cultural continuity. The house unmourned became both literal and metaphorical, the actual house Dagoth restored to prominence, and the suppressed aspects of Dunmer identity given new expression. In his communications with followers, Dagoth-Ur consistently emphasized this theme of restoration and completion, presenting the tribunal as usurpers who had fractured the true destiny of the Dunmer people. This narrative proved particularly compelling to those marginalized within Tribunal Morrowind, disaffected House members, Ashlander sympathizers, and those whose personal ambitions found no outlet in the rigid hierarchies of Temple society. For these individuals, Dagoth-Ur's promise of transformation represented not corruption but liberation, a chance to participate in a new social order where ancient wrongs would be righted and new possibilities opened. The philosophical foundation of this promised liberation centered on Dagoth-Ur's concept of unity through divine transformation. Unlike the tribunal, who maintained clear separation between themselves as gods and their followers as worshippers, Dagoth-Ur envisioned a collective divinity where the distinction between god and mortal would gradually dissolve. Through corpus and dream communion, his followers would become extensions of his consciousness, participating directly in his divine nature while maintaining aspects of their individual identities. This vision reflected Dagoth-Ur's own experience of divinity. The merging of his consciousness with the heart had not erased Vorin Dagoth, but transformed him into something greater. He believed this transformation could extend to all Dunmer, creating a unified divine entity with the heart of Lorkhan as its center and himself as its primary consciousness. In his distorted worldview, this represented the fulfillment of ancient Khymri destiny, a god born from the people themselves rather than imposed from without. The construction of Akulakhin, the second Numidium, represented the physical manifestation of this metaphysical vision. Based on designs stolen from Kagranak's original plans for the Dwemer god construct, Akulakhin would serve as a tangible extension of the collective divine entity Dagoth-Ur sought to create. Unlike the original Numidium, which required the Mantella as a substitute heart, Akulakhin would be powered directly by the heart of Lorkhan itself, with Dagoth-Ur's consciousness as the directing will. The implications of this plan extended far beyond Morrowind. Had Akulakhin been completed and activated, it would have represented a fundamental disruption of Tamriel's metaphysical order. A walking divine entity powered by the heart of Lorkhan and directed by a consciousness already merged with that artifact would possess reality-altering capabilities beyond even those demonstrated by the original Numidium during the Warp in the West. Metaphysical analyses conducted by the Imperial Battle Mage's office suggested such an entity could potentially rewrite the fundamental nature of Mundus itself. This potential explains the intensity of opposition from both the Tribunal and Daedric forces. For the Tribunal, Dagoth-Ur represented not merely a rival god, but an existential threat to their conception of divinity and the social order built upon it. For Azura, whose prophecies guided the Nerevarines' opposition to both Tribunal and Dagoth-Ur, his plans threatened to usurp the Daedric influence over Dunmer culture that had existed since the exodus from Somerset. The metaphysical confrontation came to its climax in 3E427 with the arrival of the Nerevarine. This figure, whether truly Nerevar reborn or simply an individual who fulfilled the conditions of prophecy, represented a third metaphysical approach distinct from both Dagoth-Ur and the Tribunal. Where the Tribunal sought godhood through application of tools to the heart, and Dagoth-Ur through fusion with the heart itself, the Nerevarine achieved mythic significance through mantling, fulfilling a prophetic role that connected them to Nerevar's original purpose. This mantling granted the Nerevarine immunity to Corprus's degenerative effects while retaining its divine benefits, a metaphysical inoculation that allowed them to confront Dagoth-Ur on equal terms. More importantly, it positioned them to break the cycle of divinity centered on the heart by using Kagranak's tools not to draw power, but to sever the heart's connections to both Dagoth-Ur and the Tribunal. The metaphysical significance of this act cannot be overstated. By breaking the enchantments binding the heart rather than attempting to harness its power, the Nerevarine rejected both models of divinity present in Morrowind, neither the controlled application of divine power exemplified by the Tribunal, nor the transformative fusion represented by Dagoth-Ur. This rejection cleared the metaphysical landscape for a return to more traditional spiritual practices, whether Daedra worship among the Ashlanders or a reformed tribunal temple acknowledging its saints' mortal origins. Dagoth-Ur's final moments revealed the ultimate vulnerability in his form of divinity. When the heart's enchantments were broken and its physical form disappeared from Mundus, Dagoth-Ur's consciousness, so thoroughly merged with the artifact, could not maintain independent existence. Unlike the Tribunal, whose divinity, though derived from the heart, had developed separate metaphysical foundations over millennia, Dagoth-Ur's consciousness had become inseparable from the heart itself. When it vanished, so did the core of his divine being. The legacy of Dagoth-Ur's metaphysical innovations persisted beyond his defeat. Corprus disappeared with its creator, but the metaphysical principles underlying his dream-sending and consciousness extension influenced subsequent magical research, particularly in House Telvanni. The concept of the House Unmourned, a cultural identity suppressed but seeking restoration, resonated through Morrowind's political landscape during the turbulent years following the fall of the Tribunal, contributing to the revitalization of Great House Dagoth under new leadership during the Fourth Era. The first documented blight storm swept across the Ashlands in 3E400, catching even experienced Ashlander scouts by surprise. Unlike the typical ash storms that had plagued Vardenfell for millennia, this phenomenon carried a distinctive red tinge and unnatural electrical discharges that crackled through the swirling clouds. House Redoran patrol records describe the storm's approach. The horizon darkened with an angry crimson hue unlike any natural weather. The very air seemed to thicken, carrying particles that appeared to pulse with malevolent energy. These initial storms remained confined to the immediate vicinity of Red Mountain, contained by the natural wind patterns that circulated around the volcanic peak. Temple authorities dismissed early reports as exaggerations of normal volcanic activity, attributing the unusual coloration to increased sulfur emissions from Red Mountain's caldera. This explanation satisfied most Vardenfell residents, particularly those in distant settlements like Balmora and Sadrith Mora, who had yet to witness the phenomenon firsthand. By 3E410, however, the blight storms had intensified in both frequency and range. The distinctive red clouds began reaching the grazelands to the northeast and portions of the West Gash region, bringing with them the first cases of what locals called the rust disease, a condition that caused crops to wither and animals to develop weeping sores. House Telvanni mycologists noted with alarm that even their carefully cultivated mushroom towers showed signs of contamination when exposed to the storms, developing abnormal growths that pulsed with the same reddish energy visible in the clouds. The composition of the blight itself defied conventional alchemical analysis. Samples collected by Imperial Legion researchers contained particles that could not be identified through standard methods. When viewed under magical detection spells, these particles emanated faint traces of divine energy, similar to that recorded near Dwemer ruins, but distorted in ways that suggested corruption or transformation. Most concerning to temple authorities was the discovery that the particles appeared to respond to proximity to sleepers, becoming more active when near unconscious subjects. This connection between the blight and dream states provided the first concrete evidence linking the storms to Dagoth-Ur's awakening. Diviner Loro Serrano of the Temple observed that the intensity of blight storms increased during periods when dream sendings from Red Mountain were most frequently reported. His research, later suppressed by temple authorities, suggested that the blight functioned as a physical extension of Dagoth-Ur's consciousness, a means of projecting his influence beyond the ghost fence even before its construction was complete. The ecological impact of the blight storms transformed Vardenfell's landscape over decades. Regions regularly exposed to the storms developed characteristic features. Vegetation turned gray and brittle, water sources developed a metallic taste and reddish sediment, and native wildlife either fled or underwent disturbing mutations. The most heavily affected areas, particularly the Malag Amur region and portions of the Ashlands, became nearly uninhabitable except by creatures already transformed by the blight's influence. These transformed creatures represented another avenue of Dagoth-Ur's expanding power. Common Vardenfell species exposed to prolonged blight contamination developed aggressive behavior and physical alterations that made them increasingly dangerous. Nyx hounds developed additional chitinous plates and more potent venom glands. Quama workers grew to the size of warriors while displaying unprecedented aggression, and even the normally peaceful elite became territorial predators with enhanced regenerative capabilities. House Redoran hunting parties documented these changes in detailed reports to their council members. One such report from 3E415 described an encounter with blight-affected cliff racers. The creature's wingspan had increased by at least a third, while their normally leathery skin displayed patches of hardened scale-like growth. Most disturbing was their coordinated attack pattern. These normally solitary hunters moved with unnatural synchronization, as though directed by a single mind. This observation touched on a crucial aspect of the blight's function. Beyond its physical effects, the storms carried psychic impressions of Dagoth-Ur's consciousness. Extended exposure gradually attuned victims to his dream sending, creating a subtle connection that made them more susceptible to Sixth House influence. For wildlife, this connection manifested as altered behavior patterns that mimicked aspects of Dagoth-Ur's will, increased aggression, territorial expansion, and in some cases, rudimentary coordination beyond the species' natural capabilities. For the Dunmer population, the psychological effects proved more insidious. Those regularly exposed to blight storms reported increasingly vivid dreams featuring Red Mountain and a golden-masked figure speaking in seductive riddles. These dreams often contained fragments of forbidden knowledge about House Dagoth and subtle criticisms of the tribunal that resonated with the dreamer's existing doubts. Temple physicians noted that patients suffering from blight dreams showed altered brain activity patterns even when awake, suggesting the dreams created lasting changes in neural pathways. By 3E420, with the ghost fence nearing completion, the pattern of blight storm distribution revealed Dagoth-Ur's strategic intent. Rather than spreading uniformly from Red Mountain, the storms followed channels that corresponded to ancient House Dagoth territories and sites of historical significance to Vorin Dagoth's mortal life. This targeting suggested both a connection to Dagoth-Ur's memories and a deliberate effort to reclaim his house's former influence through environmental transformation. The ghost fence, once fully operational, successfully contained the most intense blight manifestations, but could not completely prevent the storms from affecting Vardenfell. The barrier's height, while impressive, could not block high-altitude particles that gradually dispersed across the island during particularly violent eruptions from Red Mountain. Additionally, the fence contained gaps at necessary transit points that allowed some contamination to escape during severe weather events. These limitations meant that by 3E427, most of Vardenfell had experienced at least occasional blight exposure, with regions closest to Red Mountain suffering near constant contamination. The cumulative effect transformed the island's ecosystem, creating environmental conditions that increasingly favored Dagoth-Ur's influence and the spread of his most powerful weapon, Corpus disease. The first documented case of Corpus appeared in 3E382 in an Ashlander camp near the future site of the ghost fence. The victim, a young hunter named Asaba Bentis, returned from a scouting expedition near Red Mountain with complaints of skin irritation and disturbing dreams. Within days, his condition deteriorated dramatically. His skin developed tumorous growths that burst to reveal fibrous tissue with a reddish crystalline structure, while his mental state alternated between catatonia and violent rage. Tribal healers, recognizing something beyond their experience, transported Asaba Bentis to the temple in Ghost Gate for treatment. There, healers documented the progression of his symptoms with growing horror. The growths continued to spread, eventually covering most of his body while his limbs elongated abnormally. Most disturbing was the victim's occasional lucidity, during which he spoke of joining the family and the sleeper's awakening before returning to his aggressive state. When conventional healing magic and alchemical treatments proved ineffective, temple authorities quarantined the victim and began more experimental approaches. Restoration spells temporarily slowed the physical transformations, but could not reverse them. Attempts to purge the disease through fire-based destruction magic caused the crystalline structures to actually absorb and redirect the magical energy, accelerating the transformation. After exhausting all options, the attending healers were forced to terminate the patient through physical means, documenting that conventional death appears to be the only release from the divine disease. This first case established the pattern that would characterize corporous infections for decades to come. The disease progressed through distinct stages, beginning with skin irritation and disturbing dreams, followed by the appearance of small tumorous growths typically around the face and extremities. As these growths expanded, victims experienced increased physical strength and endurance alongside deteriorating mental faculties. The final stage saw massive physical deformities, near complete loss of recognizable intelligence, and apparent immortality. Corpus victims showed no signs of aging and demonstrated remarkable regenerative capabilities that made them extremely difficult to kill. The temple initially classified Corpus as a particularly virulent form of the divine diseases historically attributed to the tribunal's enemies. Early containment efforts focused on isolating victims and preventing physical contact, which appeared to be the primary transmission vector. These measures proved partially effective, but failed to account for the disease's ability to spread through airborne spores released by advanced stage victims, a property that would not be discovered until 3E400. The metaphysical nature of Corpus became apparent as temple mages conducted more thorough examinations of infected tissue. Unlike conventional diseases caused by natural pathogens, Corpus represented a metaphysical contagion, divine energy from the heart, filtered through Dagoth-Ur's consciousness, manifested in physical form. The tumorous growths contained trace elements similar to those found in Dwemer artifacts associated with the heart of Lorkhan, suggesting a direct connection to the source of Dagoth-Ur's power. This discovery prompted temple authorities to reclassify Corpus as Dagoth's divine disease and implement more stringent containment protocols. Victims were no longer treated as patients, but as vectors of sixth house influence, to be isolated and studied rather than healed. Specialized facilities were established in remote locations, most notably the Corpusarium beneath Telfer, where the Telvanni wizard Divaith for collected Corpus victims for research purposes. Fur's extensive studies revealed perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Corpus, its apparent conferral of immortality. Victims who survived the initial transformation showed no signs of aging or natural deterioration. Wounds inflicted on Corpus victims healed with unprecedented speed, and they demonstrated immunity to all other diseases. For documented cases of victims surviving conditions that would kill normal Dunmer, including extended submersion, massive trauma, and exposure to toxic substances. This combination of immortality with mental deterioration and physical transformation illuminated Dagoth-Ur's ultimate intention for the disease. Corpus represented not merely a weapon against his enemies, but a twisted gift to the Dunmer people, a means of achieving the immortality the tribunal had claimed for themselves while binding the recipients to his will. In his communications with Sixth House cultists, Dagoth-Ur referred to Corpus as the blessing of flesh and the path to unity, framing the horrific transformations as necessary steps toward a transcendent collective consciousness. The creation of specialized Corpus entities demonstrated this intent most clearly. While most victims degenerated into mindless, corporous beasts, a select few underwent more controlled transformations. These individuals, typically those with pre-existing connections to Dagoth-Ur through dreams or ancestry, developed into specialized forms that maintained aspects of their original intelligence while gaining unique abilities tied to Dagoth-Ur's divine power. The most common of these specialized forms was the Ascended Sleeper, corpus victims whose transformation followed a specific pattern guided by Dagoth-Ur's direct influence. Unlike standard corpus beasts, Ascended Sleepers retain their intelligence and gain the ability to project Dagoth-Ur's dream sending to others. Physically, they develop distinctive features including elongated limbs, tentacle-like facial appendages, and crystalline growths that channel divine energy. These beings served as field commanders for Sixth House operations, directing lesser corpus creatures and overseeing the establishment of shrines outside Red Mountain. Even more significant were the Ash Poets, advanced corpus victims whose transformation enhanced rather than degraded their mental capabilities. These rare individuals experienced a metaphysical awakening that allowed them to perceive aspects of Dagoth-Ur's divine consciousness directly. They composed the dream verses that formed the core of Sixth House doctrine, creating texts that contained both literal instructions for cultists and metaphysical codes that altered the reader's consciousness to become more receptive to Dagoth-Ur's influence. The hierarchy of corpus transformation revealed Dagoth-Ur's vision for Morrowind's future, a graduated ascension where all Dunmer would eventually join his extended consciousness, with different forms serving different functions within the collective entity. At the pinnacle stood the Ash Vampires, directly infused with portions of Dagoth-Ur's divine essence. Below them, Ascended Sleepers and Ash Poets formed an administrative class, maintaining connection between Dagoth-Ur and lesser beings. Standard corpus victims would serve as the labor force and defensive units, while newly infected Dunmer would constantly replenish the ranks as the transformation spread across Vardenfell. This structured approach to corpus distribution accelerated in the decades leading up to 3E427. Sixth House bases established throughout Vardenfell served as infection vectors, with cultists deliberately exposing selected individuals to corpus spores. These bases typically contained specialized chambers where newly infected victims underwent the initial transformation under the guidance of Ascended Sleepers, who used dream sending to direct the process toward desired outcomes rather than random degeneration. The strategic pattern of corpus spread revealed Dagoth-Ur's priorities. Initial outbreaks concentrated in regions with historical connections to House Dagoth, particularly northern Vardenfell and areas near ancestral tombs associated with the Sixth House. As the disease established footholds in these regions, secondary outbreaks began appearing near centers of political power, Balmora, Aldrune, and eventually the outskirts of Vivec City itself. This progression suggested a deliberate attempt to undermine tribunal authority by demonstrating the temple's inability to contain the disease. By 3E425, the resurrection of House Dagoth as the Sixth House cult represented Dagoth-Ur's most effective means of extending his influence beyond Red Mountain. Unlike the indiscriminate spread of Blight and Corpus, the cult operated with strategic precision, establishing a hidden network that infiltrated all levels of Vardenfell society while remaining largely invisible to temple authorities. The organizational structure of the Sixth House mirrored traditional Great House hierarchy, but with significant metaphysical modifications. At its apex stood Dagoth-Ur himself, functioning not merely as a leader, but as the central consciousness connecting all members. Below him, the Ash Vampires formed an inner circle of direct extensions of his divine will. Each Ash Vampire, bearing the name Dagoth, followed by a personal identifier, Dagoth Audros, Dagoth Vemin, etc., maintained responsibility for specific aspects of Sixth House operations. These Ash Vampires operated primarily within Red Mountain, but occasionally ventured beyond the Ghost Fence for critical missions. Their appearances outside the mountain were rare enough to become the stuff of terrified whispers among Vardenfell's population. Temple records describe them as tall, ashen-skinned figures wearing elaborate golden masks and flowing robes adorned with House Dagoth insignia. Their movements combined unnatural grace with an impression of immense physical power, while their voices reportedly carried harmonic undertones that induced disorientation in listeners. Each ash vampire maintained a distinct personality and specialization while sharing Dagoth-Ur's overarching consciousness. Dagoth Odros focused on military operations, coordinating the movements of Corpus beasts and cultists throughout Vardenfell. Dagoth Vemin oversaw the establishment and maintenance of shrines, ensuring proper ritual observances that strengthened the connection between Dagoth-Ur and his followers. Dagoth Gars specialized in recruitment, identifying potential converts through dream analysis and directing the initial stages of indoctrination. Below the Ash vampires in the hierarchy stood the Ascended Sleepers, advanced Corpus victims whose transformation had been guided to preserve their intelligence while granting them supernatural abilities. These beings served as field commanders for Sixth House operations, each typically overseeing a specific region or project. Physically distinctive with their elongated limbs and tentacle-like facial appendages, Ascended Sleepers could project Dagoth-Ur's dream sending to others, allowing them to recruit new members and coordinate existing cultists without direct contact. The Dream Zealots, sometimes called Ash Poets, occupied the next tier in the hierarchy. These individuals had undergone partial corpus transformation that enhanced their mental capabilities without significantly altering their physical appearance. This limited transformation allowed them to move freely in Dunmer society while maintaining a deep connection to Dagoth-Ur's consciousness. Dream Zealots composed the dream verses that formed Sixth House doctrine and served as recruiters, identifying susceptible individuals through subtle conversations and dream interpretation. The majority of Sixth House cult members fell into the category of sleepers, ordinary Dunmer in the early stages of Sixth House influence. These individuals maintained their normal lives and appearances while experiencing increasingly frequent dreams connecting them to Dagoth-Ur. Physical symptoms remained minimal, typically limited to insomnia and slight skin discoloration that could be attributed to stress or environmental factors. Sleepers served as the cult's eyes and ears throughout Vardenfell, gathering information and identifying potential recruits while remaining undetected by temple authorities. At the lowest tier of the hierarchy were the Dreamers, those whose connection to Dagoth-Ur had progressed to the point of noticeable behavioral changes, but who had not yet undergone physical transformation. Dreamers typically abandoned their previous lives, traveling to Sixth House bases where they served as laborers and guards. Their mental state fluctuated between periods of lucidity and trance-like states during which they communicated directly with Dagoth-Ur's consciousness. This hierarchical structure facilitated the cult's expansion across Vardenfell through a carefully orchestrated recruitment process. The initial contact almost invariably came through dreams, subtle at first, featuring symbolic imagery of Red Mountain and the Golden Mask, then gradually becoming more direct as the recipient proved receptive. These dreams targeted specific demographics, those with ancestral connections to House Dagoth, individuals experiencing disillusionment with the Tribunal Temple, and those whose psychological profiles indicated susceptibility to influence. House Telvanni research into this dream-sending phenomenon revealed patterns in the targeted individuals. Those born under certain sign constellations, particularly the Shadow and the Tower, showed heightened receptivity to Dagoth-Ur's dream influence. Genetic factors also played a role, with descendants of House Dagoth members experiencing more vivid and compelling dreams even generations after their family's official dissolution. Most concerning to temple authorities was the discovery that proximity to Sixth House artifacts significantly increased dream receptivity even in otherwise resistant individuals. These artifacts formed a crucial component of the cult's expansion strategy. Small Sixth House shrines established in caves, ancestral tombs, and abandoned structures throughout Vardenfell contained objects infused with Dagoth-Ur's influence. The most common were ash statues, small figurines carved from volcanic stone depicting a robed figure with a distinctive golden mask. These statues emitted subtle magical emanations that affected nearby sleepers, making them more receptive to dream sending and gradually drawing them into the cult's influence. The distribution of ash statues followed a deliberate pattern. Cultists placed them in the homes of potential recruits, often disguised as conventional ancestral worship items. In urban areas, statues appeared in storage areas of corner clubs and trading houses, affecting both employees and customers who spent significant time nearby. By 3E427, Redorengard reports indicated ash statues had been discovered in nearly every settlement on Vardenfell, with particularly high concentrations in Balmora and the outlying regions of Vivec City. Soul gems represented another category of 6th House artifacts with more specialized functions. Unlike conventional soul gems used in enchanting, those created by 6th House rituals contained fragments of Dagoth Ur's consciousness rather than captured souls. These gems served as communication nodes, allowing ascended sleepers and dream zealots to coordinate activities across distances without risking detection through conventional magical communication, which might be monitored by temple authorities. The most powerful 6th House artifacts were the various Tools of Dagoth, objects created by ritually infusing ordinary items with divine energy drawn directly from Dagoth Ur. These included daggers that inflicted Corpus with each wound, amulets that enhanced the wearer's dream-sending abilities, and ceremonial masks that granted partial immunity to temple magic. Such items were extremely rare, typically held only by high-ranking cult members who used them for specific operations requiring direct confrontation with temple forces. The religious practices of the 6th House cult centered on the concept of the new dreamer, Dagoth Ur's vision of a unified Dunmer consciousness connected directly to him, and through him to the heart of Lorkhan. Ritual observances focused on strengthening this connection through dream sharing, consumption of Corpus-infused substances in carefully measured doses, and meditation on dream verses composed by the Ash poets. A typical 6th House shrine contained several distinct elements arranged in a specific pattern that metaphysically resonated with the heart chamber beneath Red Mountain. At the center stood a bell hammer, a ceremonial tool used to strike specially crafted chimes that produced tones mimicking the frequencies Kagrenak had discovered in the heart of Lorkhan. Surrounding this central element were arranged ash statues, soul gems, and ceremonial vessels containing Corpus-derived substances used in rituals. The walls of these shrines typically featured distinctive iconography, stylized representations of Red Mountain erupting with golden light, abstract patterns derived from Dagoth Ur's dream verses, and in more established locations, murals depicting the true history of the Battle of Red Mountain according to 6th House doctrine. This alternative historical narrative portrayed Vorin Dagoth as the loyal guardian betrayed by the tribunal, who murdered Nerevar and stole divinity that was never meant for them. Ritual practices varied according to a participant's position in the cult hierarchy. Sleepers and dreamers engaged primarily in passive worship, sleeping near ash statues to strengthen their dream connection, and occasionally consuming mild Corpus-derived elixirs that initiated the earliest stages of transformation. Dream zealots led more active ceremonies, including the composition and recitation of dream verses designed to alter consciousness and the preparation of more potent Corpus substances. At the highest levels, ascended sleepers performed rituals directly connected to Dagoth Ur's divine power. These ceremonies included the creation of new ash statues, the infusion of ordinary objects with divine energy to create 6th House artifacts, and in rare cases, the guided transformation of selected cultists into specialized Corpus forms. Such high-level rituals required specific astronomical alignments and typically coincided with increased volcanic activity at Red Mountain. The spread of the sleeping, the gradual process by which ordinary Dunmer fell under Dagoth Ur's influence, followed distinct patterns that reveal much about his strategic priorities. Initial recruitment focused on individuals with ancestral connections to House Dagoth, many of whom carried subconscious receptivity to their ancient lord's influence. These early converts established the first 6th House bases outside Red Mountain, typically in remote locations with historical significance to the original House Dagoth. As the cult expanded, recruitment broadened to target strategic demographics within Vardenfell society. House servants and lower-ranking retainers provided access to influential households, allowing the placement of ash statues and the gathering of valuable intelligence. Traders and caravan guards facilitated the distribution of Sixth House artifacts across the island while reporting on troop movements and temple activities. Even some temple initiates fell under Dagoth-Ur's influence, providing advance warning of investigations and occasionally sabotaging containment efforts. By 3E 425, the Sixth House had established a network of bases throughout Vardenfell, each serving specific functions in Dagoth-Ur's grand design. Major bases like Kagorun, the ancient capital of House Dagoth, contained extensive facilities for the creation of ash statues and the refinement of Corpus-derived substances. Medium-sized bases established in ancestral tombs and cave systems served as regional coordination centers, where dream zealots could meet with local sleepers without attracting attention. The smallest bases, often consisting of nothing more than a simple shrine hidden in an abandoned building, functioned as recruitment centers where curious dreamers could experience their first direct contact with Sixth House practices. The geographical distribution of these bases revealed Dagoth-Ur's territorial ambitions. The highest concentration appeared in the northern Ashlands and West Gash regions, corresponding to the historical territories of House Dagoth before its destruction. Secondary clusters emerged near centers of political power, Balmora, Aldrune, and the approaches to Vivec City, positioning cult influence where it could most effectively undermine existing authority structures. Perhaps most concerning to imperial authorities was the discovery of Sixth House presence in Ebonheart and other imperial administrative centers. Reports from the East Empire Company documented strange dreams affecting dock workers, while Legion commanders noted unusual behavior among certain auxiliaries assigned to warehouse duty. These footholds, while small, demonstrated Dagoth-Ur's awareness of the political landscape beyond traditional Dunmer power structures, and his intention to subvert imperial authority alongside the tribunal temple. The Sixth House cult's operations maintained a delicate balance between secrecy and expansion. Rather than directly challenging temple authority, cultists worked to gradually undermine it through subtle influence. Dream sending targeted those already harboring doubts about tribunal divinity, offering an alternative spiritual path that resonated with suppressed aspects of Dunmer cultural identity. Ash statues appeared in locations where temple presence was minimal, spreading influence into gaps in the established religious infrastructure. Beneath the smoldering peak of Red Mountain, in chambers illuminated by the crimson glow of the heart of Lorkhan, Dagoth-Ur labored on his ultimate creation. Aculakhin, the second Numidium, took shape as ash vampires, and ascended sleepers transported materials from across Vardenfell to the construction site deep within the mountain's core. Unlike its Dwemer predecessor, this colossal construct incorporated organic components alongside mechanical elements, reflecting Dagoth-Ur's philosophy of unity between flesh and divine power. The design of Aculakhin drew heavily from Kagranak's original plans for Numidium, which Dagoth-Ur had studied during his centuries of communion with the heart. However, significant modifications reflected his unique vision. Where the original Numidium required the Mantella as a substitute heart, Aculakhin would be powered directly by the heart of Lorkhan itself, with Dagoth-Ur's consciousness serving as the directing will. This direct connection would grant the construct reality, altering capabilities far beyond those demonstrated by the first Numidium during the warp in the west. The physical form of Aculakhin stood approximately 300 feet tall, with a frame constructed from a combination of Dwemer metals, volcanic stone, and crystallized corpus tissue. The chest cavity contained an elaborate chamber designed to house the heart of Lorkhan, surrounded by tonal resonators that would amplify and direct its divine energy throughout the construct. The limbs incorporated joint mechanisms based on Dwemer animunculi, but scaled to massive proportions, allowing for fluid movement despite the construct's enormous size. Dagoth-Ur's personal notes, recovered from Kagorun after his defeat, revealed the strategic purpose behind Akulakhin's creation. The construct would serve as both weapon and symbol, a physical manifestation of his divine will capable of projecting power across Tamriel while simultaneously representing the new unity he envisioned for the Dunmer people. In his distorted worldview, Akulakhin would serve as the vanguard for Morrowind's transformation and the catalyst for expelling foreign influences from the ancestral homeland of the Dunmer. The construction timeline indicated Dagoth Ur's growing sense of urgency. Early phases of the project, beginning around 3E400, progressed methodically as materials were gathered and the foundation established. By 3E420, the pace accelerated significantly, with 6th House operations increasingly focused on acquiring specific resources needed for the construct's completion. Redoran Patrol reports noted increased activity around Dwemer ruins, particularly those containing workshops that once produced the specialized metals used in animunculi construction. Telvanni intelligence suggested that Akulakhin would have reached completion by 3E429 had the Nerevari not intervened. This timeline aligned with astronomical calculations recorded in Ash Poet verses, which referenced a specific alignment of celestial bodies that would enhance the resonance between the heart of Lorkhan and the tonal architecture of Akulakhin. Dagoth Ur planned to activate his creation during this astronomical window, maximizing its power for the initial phase of his campaign against the Tribunal and their foreign allies. The strategic applications of Akulakhin formed the centerpiece of Dagoth Ur's plan to transform Morrowind. Upon activation, the construct would first be directed against the Tribunal themselves, specifically targeting their seats of power, Vivec City, Mournhold, and Satha Sil's Clockwork City. Temple scholars who analyzed 6th House documents believe Dagoth Ur intended to use Akulakhin to physically destroy these locations, while simultaneously projecting his consciousness through the construct to neutralize the Tribunal's remaining divine powers. Following the neutralization of the Tribunal, Dagoth Ur planned to deploy Akulakhin against Imperial forces in Vardenfell and mainland Morrowind. The construct's size and divine power would make conventional military resistance futile, forcing an Imperial withdrawal from the province. 6th House documents described specific targeting priorities, beginning with Fort Moonmoth and the Imperial installations in Ebonheart, before proceeding to Legion garrisons throughout the province. The third phase of Akulakhin's deployment would focus on establishing a physical perimeter around Morrowind, creating what Dagoth Ur called the Divine Barrier, a zone of influence extending from the construct that would prevent unauthorized entry into the province. This barrier would not merely block physical passage, but would subject those attempting to cross it to the influence of Corpus, ensuring that only those willing to join Dagoth Ur's collective consciousness could enter Morrowind's territory. With external threats neutralized, Akulakhin would then serve as the focal point for Dagoth Ur's transformation of Dunmer society. The construct would establish a network of smaller resonators throughout Morrowind, creating a web of divine energy that would gradually expose all Dunmer to a controlled form of Corpus. This exposure would initiate what Dagoth Ur called the Great Ascension, the systematic transformation of the entire Dunmer population into extensions of his consciousness. The metaphysical implications of this plan were staggering. Unlike conventional conquest, which subjugates populations through force while leaving their fundamental nature intact, Dagoth Ur sought to literally incorporate the Dunmer people into his extended being. Each transformed individual would retain aspects of their original personality and skills, but would experience consciousness as part of a greater whole directly connected to Dagoth Ur, and through him, to the heart of Lorkhan. This transformation would not be instantaneous, but would progress through carefully managed stages. Initial exposure would create dream connections similar to those experienced by sleepers, establishing the basic link between individual Dunmer and Dagoth Ur's consciousness. Subsequent exposures would gradually strengthen this connection while initiating physical changes, minor at first, then increasingly pronounced as the individual's body adapted to channel divine energy. Dagoth Ur's notes describe the final state of this transformation in terms that reveal his distorted understanding of unity. The many shall become one, yet each shall know themselves more truly than before. The barriers of flesh shall dissolve as the barriers between minds have already begun to fade. Through me, all shall touch divinity. Through the heart, all shall know immortality. The theological framework underlying this vision represented a radical reinterpretation of Dunmer religious traditions. Where the tribunal had positioned themselves as gods above their followers, Dagoth-ur offered what he considered a more egalitarian approach, godhood shared among all Dunmer through their connection to him. This concept resonated with suppressed aspects of Khymri tradition, particularly the emphasis on collective spiritual experience that had characterized worship practices before the tribunal's ascension. For those outside the Dunmer population, Dagoth-ur's plans were considerably less benevolent. House Redoran intelligence reports indicated that he viewed other races as fundamentally incompatible with his vision of a unified Morrowind. Non-Dunmer would face three options: voluntary departure from Morrowind, execution, or exposure to uncontrolled corpus that would transform them into mindless servants rather than conscious participants in the collective consciousness. This racial exclusivity stemmed from Dagoth-ur's experiences during the First Era, when Dwemer technological advancement and Nordic invasions threatened Khymri cultural independence. His perspective remained locked in these ancient conflicts, viewing the imperial presence in Morrowind as merely the latest in a series of foreign encroachments that had disrupted the Dunmer's true destiny. Through Akulakhan and the transformation of the Dunmer people, he sought to permanently end this cycle by creating a society that could never again be conquered or culturally subsumed. The economic dimensions of Dagoth-ur's plan revealed pragmatic considerations alongside metaphysical ambitions. Sixth House documents outlined a post-transformation economic model where traditional house structures would be replaced by function-based collectives directly connected to his consciousness. These collectives would maintain Morrowind's self-sufficiency through continued agricultural production, mining operations, and specialized crafting, but without the competitive aspects that characterized relations between the great houses. Trade with outside regions would be severely restricted, limited to essential resources unavailable within Morrowind's borders. This near isolation reflected both security concerns and Dagoth-ur's desire to minimize cultural contamination from foreign influences. The economic model presumed significant advantages from the Dunmer transformation: enhanced physical capabilities, perfect coordination through the shared consciousness, and immortality that would allow for the development of skills over centuries rather than decades. Military planning documents recovered from Kagurun detailed how transformed Dunmer would defend the new Morrowind from external threats. The first line of defense would be Akulakhan itself, capable of direct intervention against major incursions. Supporting this would be specialized corpus forms developed for combat applications, creatures combining the physical resilience of advanced corpus with retained tactical intelligence and weapon skills. Behind these specialized forces would stand the general Dunmer population, their transformed bodies naturally resistant to conventional weapons and capable of regenerating from injuries that would kill ordinary mortals. The shared consciousness would allow for unprecedented coordination in battle, with strategies adapted in real time based on collective perception of the battlefield. Against such defenses, Dagoth-ur believed even a full-scale imperial invasion would prove futile. The cultural aspects of Dagoth-ur's vision showed surprising sophistication despite their disturbing foundation. Rather than eliminating Dunmer cultural traditions, he planned to revive and transform them, particularly those suppressed by the Tribunal Temple. Ancient Khymri art forms, architectural styles, and literary traditions would be restored, but reinterpreted through the lens of the collective consciousness. Creative expression would continue, but would serve to explore and celebrate the experience of divine unity rather than individual perspectives. Perhaps most revealing of Dagoth-ur's ultimate ambitions were documents addressing his plans for expansion beyond Morrowind's borders. While initial operations focused on securing the province and transforming its population, later phases contemplated gradual expansion into neighboring regions. Black Marsh would be targeted first, its relative isolation and imperial neglect making it vulnerable to infiltration, by 6th House agents carrying Corpus. Skyrim's eastern holds would face similar attention, with Dream sending targeting Nord populations near the Morrowind border. These expansion plans included timelines extending centuries into the future, reflecting Dagoth-Ur's confidence in the immortality his transformation would confer. The documents described a gradual process of infiltration, conversion of key individuals, and establishment of 6th House bases that would serve as vectors for spreading Corpus beyond Morrowind. The ultimate goal appeared to be nothing less than the transformation of all Tamriel into an extension of Dagoth-Ur's consciousness, a process expected to require millennia, but considered inevitable given the advantages of immortality and unified purpose. The most troubling aspect of these plans involved potential confrontation with Daedric princes. Dagoth-Ur believed that the collective divine entity he sought to create would eventually rival the princes in power, particularly as its consciousness expanded to encompass more individuals. Several documents contained analyses of specific princes and strategies for neutralizing their influence within Morrowind, beginning with those most connected to Dunmer culture, Azura, Mephala, and Bothaya. This ambition to challenge Daedric influence revealed the true scope of Dagoth-Ur's megalomania. Having experienced divinity through his connection to the heart, he had come to view even the Daedric princes as potential rivals rather than insurmountable cosmic forces. The Tribunal's success in diminishing Daedric worship had convinced him that with sufficient power, drawn from the heart and amplified through millions of connected Dunmer minds, he could eventually establish himself as the sole divine influence in Morrowind and beyond. The concept of the Sharmat appears throughout ancient Velothi texts, though its meaning remained obscure to most Dunmer scholars under Tribunal rule. Temple authorities deliberately obscured references to this figure, recognizing its connection to prophecies that threatened their divine authority. In the original Khymri religious traditions, the Sharmat represented a false incarnate, a being who claimed divine right but whose power derived from corrupted sources. Ashlander oral traditions preserved the most complete descriptions of the Sharmat, passing them through generations of wise women despite temple persecution. These traditions described the Sharmat as the one who sits upon a throne not his own, and he who wears divinity like stolen clothes. The prophecies warned that the Sharmat would speak with a golden voice, offering dreams of power and unity, while concealing his true nature as a destroyer of cultural identity. Dagoth-Ur embodied this prophetic figure with unsettling precision. His golden mask became the literal manifestation of the golden voice, mentioned in ancient texts, while his claims to divine right based on his stewardship of the heart directly paralleled the Sharmat's usurpation of authority. Most significantly, his promise of unity through transformation aligned with prophecies warning that the Sharmat would make one of many and speak of flesh made one with thought. The earliest recorded prophecy concerning the Sharmat appears in the Stranger's Almanac, a first-era text attributed to an anonymous Ashlander wise woman. This document, preserved in fragments within House Redoran's ancestral archives, established the fundamental connection between the Sharmat and the Nerevarine. When the Sharmat rises from beneath the mountain, wearing divinity like stolen robes, the incarnate shall return. Neither outlander nor native-born, but one who has died and lived again, shall stand against the false dreamer. The wound of the land shall be the wound of the people, and only when both are healed shall peace return to Veloth's children. This prophecy established the foundational pattern that would appear throughout later Nerevarine prophecies, the conceptual pairing of Dagoth-Ur and the Nerevarine as opposing forces, one representing false unity through corruption, the other representing legitimate restoration through sacrifice and trial. Azura's role in these prophecies proved central to their development and preservation. Following the Tribunal's betrayal at Red Mountain, the Daedric prince appeared before them and delivered her famous curse, transforming the golden-skinned Chimer into the ashen-skinned Dunmer. This physical transformation served as a permanent reminder of their broken oath to Nerevar. More significantly for future events, Azura proclaimed that Nerevar would return to set right what was done wrong and expose the Tribunal's falsehoods. This initial prophecy contained no direct reference to Dagoth-Ur, focusing instead on the Tribunal's betrayal of Nerevar. However, as Dagoth-Ur's consciousness gradually reawakened beneath Red Mountain during the late Second Era, Azura's prophecies evolved to incorporate this emerging threat. Dreams sent to Ashlander wise women expanded the prophecy to include warnings about the Sleeper and the Dreamer, who would tempt the Dunmer with false unity. By the early Third Era, the complete Nerevarine prophecy had crystallized into a series of trials and signs by which the true incarnate could be identified. These included the Nerevarine's birth on a certain day to uncertain parents, their status as an outlander who would nevertheless be accepted as one of the Velothi people, and most significantly, their immunity to corpus disease. Neither blight nor age could harm the true incarnate. This immunity to corpus represented a crucial metaphysical counterbalance to Dagoth-Ur's power. Where his divine authority manifested through the spread of the divine disease, the Nerevarine's legitimacy would be proven through immunity to this corruption. This aspect of the prophecy suggested that the Nerevarine would not merely defeat Dagoth-Ur through conventional means, but would represent a fundamental rejection of his approach to divinity and unity. Dagoth-Ur's awareness of these prophecies developed gradually over the centuries of his reawakening. Initial evidence suggests he dismissed them as tribunal propaganda designed to maintain control over the Dunmer people. His early dream sendings contain no references to the Nerevarine, focusing instead on undermining faith in the tribunal and presenting himself as the legitimate restorer of ancient Khymri traditions. By 3E400, however, recovered 6th House documents reveal a shift in Dagoth-Ur's attitude toward the prophecies. As his network of dreamers expanded throughout Vardenfell, reports of individuals claiming to be the Nerevarine began reaching his consciousness. Most proved false incarnates, deluded individuals, or deliberate imposters, but their appearance suggested growing cultural receptivity to the prophecies, threatening Dagoth-Ur's narrative of legitimacy. The first documented 6th House response to a potential Nerevarine appeared in 3E410, when Dagoth-Adros dispatched Ash cultists to eliminate a former Buoyant Armiger named Dilruz Favelnim, who had gained a following among disaffected temple faithful. Favelnim claimed to have received visions from Azura revealing his identity as the reborn Nerevar, and had begun gathering supporters in the Ascadian Isles region. Before his movement could gain significant traction, 6th House assassins poisoned him with a specialized form of corpus that accelerated to fatal levels within hours, preventing his martyrdom as a corpus saint. This incident established the pattern Dagoth-Ur would follow for dealing with potential Nerevarines: swift elimination before they could fulfill enough prophetic elements to threaten his plans. Between 3E410 and 3E427, 6th House agents assassinated no fewer than 7 individuals who claimed Nerevarine status, each using methods designed to discredit the victim rather than create martyrs. Some were made to appear as common criminals killed in disputes, while others were infected with corpus and allowed to degenerate publicly, undermining their claims of divine protection. Simultaneously, Dagoth-Ur began incorporating anti-Nerevarine elements into his dream sendings. Dream sequences reported by temple informants infiltrating 6th House cults included visions of false Nerevarines leading followers to destruction and revelations that the true Nerevar had already returned in the form of Dagoth-Ur himself. This counter-propaganda aimed to confuse potential supporters of the Nerevarine prophecies and redirect their spiritual loyalty toward the 6th House. The most sophisticated aspect of Dagoth-Ur's response to the prophecies appeared in 6th House doctrinal texts recovered from Kagorun. These writings presented an alternative interpretation of Nerevar's relationship with Vorin Dagoth, suggesting they had formed a blood bond before the Battle of Red Mountain that metaphysically linked their souls. According to this revisionist history, Dagoth-Ur's reawakening represented not opposition to Nerevar's return, but its fulfillment, the two souls reuniting as one, with Dagoth-Ur as the dominant consciousness. This theological innovation served multiple strategic purposes. For those already influenced by 6th House doctrine, it neutralized the potential threat of a returning Nerevarine by incorporating that return into Dagoth-Ur's own narrative. For Ashlanders and others who maintained faith in the original prophecies, it created doubt about the nature of the true incarnate and the proper response to their appearance. Most insidiously, it established a metaphysical claim that any individual manifesting Nerevarine characteristics could be interpreted as an aspect of Dagoth-Ur's expanding consciousness rather than his opponent. By 3E425, Dagoth-Ur had established a comprehensive system for monitoring potential Nerevarine activity throughout Vardenfell. Sixth House dreamers in major settlements reported individuals expressing interest in the prophecies, while cultists infiltrated Ashlander camps to identify any who might be recognized as fulfilling the Nerevarine trials. This surveillance network extended even to the highest levels of house politics, with several counselors, advisors secretly serving as Sixth House informants. The arrival of an imperial prisoner in Seyda-Neen in 3E427 initially registered as merely another outlander of no particular significance. However, this individual's subsequent activities, meeting with Caius Cassades, visiting Ashlander camps, and investigating Sixth House bases, triggered increased scrutiny from Dagoth-Ur's agents. When reports reached Red Mountain that this outlander had been named Nerevarine by Ursulaku wise women, Dagoth-Ur implemented his most aggressive countermeasures. Sixth House assassins made 3 documented attempts on the potential Nerevarines' life before their confrontation with Dagoth-Gars at Ilyunibai. The first occurred in Balmora, where cultists poisoned the Outlander's Kwama egg supply with a slow-acting toxin designed to cause death during sleep, a symbolic attack meant to counter Azura's dream protection. The potential Nerevarines' unusually robust constitution neutralized the poison before it could take full effect. The second assassination attempt took place near Ghostgate, where Sixth House agents ambushed the Outlander's party with specialized weapons enhanced with Dagoth-Ur's divine energy. This attack failed when the potential Nerevarine demonstrated combat skills far exceeding those of a typical Outlander, suggesting the martial memory of Nerevar might indeed dwell within them. The third and most sophisticated attempt involved dream manipulation rather than physical attack. Dagoth-Ur himself reached into the Outlander's sleeping mind, attempting to implant suggestions of loyalty to the Sixth House and doubt about the Tribunal's intentions. According to Temple spies monitoring the situation, this attempt encountered unexpected resistance. Azura's protection manifested as a barrier within the dreamer's mind that Dagoth-Ur could not penetrate. Following these failed attempts, Dagoth-Ur changed tactics. Rather than simply eliminating the potential threat, he decided to test the Outlander's claim to Nerevarine status through direct exposure to Corpus. The confrontation with Dagoth-Gars at Ilyunibai was deliberately staged to ensure infection, with Gars sacrificing himself to deliver Lord Dagoth's blessing directly into the Outlander's flesh. This strategy reflected Dagoth-Ur's confidence in Corpus as the ultimate arbiter of divine legitimacy. If the Outlander succumbed to the disease's degenerative effects like countless victims before them, their claim to Nerevarine status would be disproven. If they somehow survived with their mind intact, they would presumably join Dagoth-Ur's consciousness as an advanced Corpus being, becoming an asset rather than a threat. The unexpected outcome, the Outlander contracting Corpus but being cured of its degenerative effects while retaining its beneficial aspects, represented a scenario Dagoth-Ur had not anticipated. Divaethfar's intervention, using knowledge gained from centuries studying the disease, produced the first known case of selective Corpus immunity. This development fulfilled one of the key prophetic requirements of the Nerevarine, immunity to disease and blight, while simultaneously granting the Outlander physical capabilities to rival Dagoth-Ur's enhanced servants. Dagoth-Ur's response to this development revealed his growing concern about the prophecy's fulfillment. Dream sendings throughout Vardenfell intensified, with sleepers and dreamers in major settlements becoming increasingly disruptive. Sixth House bases increased production of ash statues and specialized weapons, while ash vampires who had rarely left Red Mountain began appearing in strategic locations to strengthen defenses against the potential Nerevarines' advance. Most significantly, Dagoth-Ur accelerated work on Akulakhin, recognizing that if the prophecies were indeed unfolding, his window for implementing his grand design might be closing. Sixth House operations shifted from gradual expansion to urgent completion of key objectives, particularly those related to acquiring materials needed for the second Numidium's activation. The theological implications of the Nerevarine prophecies extended beyond the immediate conflict between Dagoth-Ur and the Outlander, fulfilling Azura's predictions. At their core, these prophecies represented competing visions of Dunmer identity and destiny. Dagoth-Ur offered unity through transformation, the merging of all Dunmer into a single consciousness connected to the heart of Lorkhan. The Nerevarine represented restoration through distinction, the healing of cultural wounds while maintaining individual identity and traditional connections to both ancestors and Daedra. This fundamental opposition manifested in their approaches to divinity itself. Dagoth-Ur sought to expand his personal godhood to encompass all Dunmer, creating a collective divine entity with himself at its center. The Nerevarine, conversely, sought not godhood, but the restoration of proper relationship between mortals and divine powers, whether ancestral spirits, Daedric princes, or the tribunal restored to their mortal perspectives. As the confrontation between these opposing forces approached its climax, Dagoth-Ur made one final attempt to subvert the prophecies. Through dream sending, he offered the advancing Nerevarine a partnership rather than opposition, the opportunity to share in his divine power and help shape the new Morrowind he envisioned. This offer, recorded in temple documents based on the Nerevarine's subsequent account, represented Dagoth-Ur's recognition that the prophecies might be fulfilled through cooperation rather than conflict if he could convince the Incarnate to join his cause. The rejection of this offer set the stage for their final confrontation in the Heart Chamber beneath Red Mountain. There, surrounded by the partially completed form of Akulakhan, the metaphysical opposition embodied in the Sharmat, and the Nerevarine would determine the fate of not just Morrowind, but potentially all of Tamriel. The prophecies that had shaped Dunmer religious understanding for centuries would reach their fulfillment, though perhaps not in the manner either Azura or Dagoth-Ur had anticipated. The journey into Red Mountain's depths began at dawn. The Nerevarine, bearing Kagranak's tools and wrapped in enchanted armor, passed through the final door of the Ghost Gate as ashen winds swirled around the ancient tribunal fortification. Guards of the buoyant armigers stood at attention, their expressions a mixture of hope and doubt as they watched the prophesied hero venture into territory no one had successfully reclaimed in centuries. The outer slopes of Red Mountain presented the first challenge. Blight storms intensified as the Nerevarine ascended, reducing visibility to mere feet and carrying caustic particles that would have scarred ordinary flesh. The immunity granted by the modified Corpus proved its worth immediately, allowing steady progress where others would have been forced to retreat. Cliff racers, twisted by prolonged exposure to the blight, circled overhead with unnatural coordination, their movements suggesting a shared consciousness directing their attacks. The entrance to Dagoth-Ur's domain lay hidden within a fissure that had opened during a particularly violent eruption decades earlier. Temple records identified this as the Facility Cavern, though these documents offered little insight into what waited beyond the narrow passage. As the Nerevarine descended into the darkness, the very air changed, becoming thicker, warmer, and carrying the metallic taste characteristic of areas where the boundary between mundane reality and divine influence had worn thin. The Facility Cavern itself revealed the first evidence of Dagoth-Ur's grand design. Enormous Dwemer pipes, some original to the mountain and others constructed by Sixth House servants, crisscrossed the cavern ceiling. These conduits channeled energy from the Heart Chamber to various parts of the facility, powering the machinery used to construct Akulakhan. The distinctive hum of tonal architecture filled the air, creating resonances that subtly affected the mind, inducing sensations of disorientation in those not attuned to Dagoth-Ur's consciousness. Ash creatures patrolled the main corridors, their movements displaying the eerie precision common to beings sharing a collective mind. Unlike the mindless aggression of Corpus beasts encountered elsewhere on Vardenfell, these guardians employed coordinated tactics, flanking maneuvers, strategic retreats to more defensible positions, and prioritization of targets based on the threat they posed. This sophistication indicated the proximity of more powerful Sixth House entities directing their actions. The first of these entities emerged in the chamber known as the Antechamber, where Dagoth Odros and Dagoth Vemin waited with an honor guard of ascended sleepers. These ash vampires, among Dagoth Ur's most ancient servants, had once been respected members of House Dagoth before their transformation. They retained not only their intelligence but centuries of combat experience, making them far more dangerous than the lesser creatures encountered thus far. The battle with these lieutenants demonstrated why conventional forces had failed to penetrate Dagoth Ur's defenses. The Ash vampires fought with weapons enhanced by direct connection to their master's divine power, capable of penetrating magical defenses that would have stopped ordinary blades. More troubling was their regenerative capability. Wounds that would have been fatal to mortal opponents closed within seconds, forcing the Nerevarine to develop tactics focused on overwhelming damage rather than precision strikes. Most dangerous of all were their mind-affecting abilities. Both Ash vampires attempted to penetrate the Nerevarine's thoughts during combat, seeking to induce confusion, fear, or even temporary allegiance to Dagoth Ur. These attacks manifested as invasive whispers promising power, unity, and liberation from the lies of the tribunal. Only the combined protection of Azura's favor and the unique mental resilience granted by the modified Corpus prevented these techniques from taking hold. With the defeat of these guardians, the path to Dagoth Ur's inner sanctum lay open. The Heart Chamber access tunnels displayed increasing integration of Dwemer technology with organic components, pipes merged with vein-like structures carrying a substance that pulsed with the same rhythm as the distant heart. The walls themselves seemed alive in places, responding to proximity with subtle movements and exuding a mist that carried dream images when inhaled. The final approach to the Heart Chamber brought the Nerevarine to the partially completed form of Aculakhin. This colossus, modeled after the first Numidium but incorporating elements of Dagoth Ur's unique vision, towered over the cavern floor. Standing nearly 300 feet tall, its metal frame integrated with crystallized Corpus tissue that gave the construct an unsettling organic quality. The chest cavity remained open, revealing the space designed to house the heart of Lorkhan, the power source that would animate this divine construct and extend Dagoth Ur's will across Tamriel. It was here, in the shadow of his greatest creation, that Dagoth Ur chose to make his first appearance. Rather than attacking immediately, he emerged from the mists surrounding Aculakhin with arms spread in a gesture of welcome. His form combined elements of his original Chimer appearance with divine modifications, taller than any natural Dunmer, his skin bearing the golden hue of the ancient Chimer rather than the ashen gray of their descendants. Most distinctive was his mask, a golden face covering that shifted subtly as if responding to thoughts beneath its surface. "I welcome you, Nerevar, my old friend," he began, his voice carrying harmonics impossible for mortal vocal cords to produce. "Or should I call you Nerevarine? The distinction matters little. What matters is that you have come, as I knew you would." What followed was not the immediate conflict many historical accounts suggest, but a conversation of profound significance for understanding Dagoth Ur's motivations and worldview. Speaking with the measured confidence of one who believed victory already assured, he presented his perspective on the events at Red Mountain millennia earlier, his awakening, and his vision for Morrowind's future. His account of the past directly challenged the Tribunal Temple's official history. He described himself not as a traitor, but as the only loyal servant of Nerevar, who had followed his lord's instructions to guard the tools of Kagrenac while Nerevar consulted with Azura. In this version, the tribunal murdered Nerevar when he returned and insisted the tools should be destroyed as the Daedric prince had advised. They then attacked Dagoth Ur himself, apparently killing him, but actually initiating the process that bound his essence to the heart. Whether this account contained elements of truth or represented a self-serving revision remains debated by scholars. What is certain is that Dagoth Ur believed it completely, his perspective shaped by centuries of communion with the heart and isolation from contradictory viewpoints. This conviction formed the foundation of his moral certainty. He viewed himself not as a villain, but as the rightful inheritor of Nerevar's authority, working to undo the tribunal's betrayal. Most revealing was Dagoth Ur's description of his plans for Morrowind. He spoke of the new Dunmer, transformed through Corpus into immortal beings sharing a collective consciousness with himself at its center. This transformation would not erase individual identity, but would transcend its limitations, creating a unified people immune to disease, aging, and death. Through Aculakhin, this unified consciousness would extend its influence across Tamriel, gradually incorporating other races or removing them from Morrowind's borders. The most unexpected element of this encounter came when Dagoth-Ur extended an offer of alliance to the Nerevarine. Rather than viewing the prophecy's fulfillment as his downfall, he proposed an alternative interpretation that Nerevar had returned not to defeat him, but to join him, completing the circle broken by the Tribunal's betrayal. He offered to share his connection to the heart, allowing the Nerevarine to experience divinity while retaining a distinct consciousness within the greater unity he envisioned. "We were brothers once, in spirit if not in blood," he said, gesturing toward Aculakhin. "We can be so again. The Tribunal stole godhood and hoarded it. I offer to share divinity with all our people, beginning with you. Together, we can create the Morrowind that should have been." This offer represented more than tactical manipulation. Recovered fragments of Dagoth-Ur's personal writings suggest he genuinely believed the Nerevarine might join him, having developed a theological framework in which their cooperation represented the proper fulfillment of Azura's prophecy. The rejection of this offer therefore carried metaphysical significance beyond the practical refusal of an alliance, representing the Nerevarines' fundamental rejection of Dagoth-Ur's vision of unity through transformation. With diplomacy exhausted, the confrontation entered its combat phase. Dagoth-Ur's fighting style revealed much about his nature as a divine entity. Unlike the Tribunal, whose powers manifested as externalized magic, lightning bolts, telekinesis, illusions, Dagoth-Ur's abilities emerged directly from his transformed flesh. His limbs elongated and hardened at will, forming weapons more durable than ebony. Wounds closed instantly, while portions of his body could separate into mist before reforming elsewhere in the chamber, making conventional combat strategies ineffective. More dangerous than these physical abilities was his mental influence. Throughout the battle, he projected directly into the Nerevarines' mind, attempting to induce confusion, hesitation, or even temporary paralysis. These attacks came not as crude compulsions, but as memory-like impressions, moments from Nerevar's life that Dagoth-Ur claimed to share, presented in ways that questioned the Nerevarines' purpose and allegiance. The battle moved through several phases, with Dagoth-Ur retreating to different positions around Aculakhin as the Nerevarine pressed the attack. His strategy became clear. He was drawing his opponent deeper into the heart chamber, toward the heart of Lorkhan itself. Whether this represented confidence in his stronger connection to the heart or a desperate gamble to expose the Nerevarine to its corrupting influence remains debated by strategic analysts who later studied accounts of the confrontation. The critical turning point came not through conventional combat, but through the application of Kagranak's tools. The Nerevarine, recognizing that Dagoth-Ur's divine nature made him effectively immortal while connected to the heart, shifted focus to the source of his power rather than the god himself. Using Wraithguard as protection, the Nerevarine struck the heart with Sunder and Keening in the precise sequence Vivek had described, applying the tonal architecture principles Kagranak had discovered millennia earlier. The metaphysical implications of this approach proved crucial to success. Rather than attempting to harness the heart's power, the approach taken by both the Tribunal and Dagoth-Ur, the Nerevarine sought to sever its connections to the mortal plane entirely. Each strike with the tools disrupted specific frequency patterns that bound the heart to Mundus, gradually unwinding enchantments that had persisted since the Dawn era. Dagoth-Ur's reaction to this strategy revealed his fundamental vulnerability. As the tools struck the heart, he experienced the effects directly through his symbiotic connection to the artifact. Each blow weakened not just his divine powers, but his very existence, which had become inseparable from the heart during his centuries of communion with it. His attacks grew increasingly desperate, abandoning tactical sophistication for raw aggression as he sought to stop the unraveling of his divine essence. "What are you doing?" he cried as the heart's physical form began to fade from the mortal plane. "This is the point of no return. You cannot destroy the heart. It is beyond mortal comprehension." The final moments of the confrontation occurred as the heart vanished entirely from the chamber. Without its sustaining power, several metaphysical processes triggered simultaneously. Akulakhin, partially animated by energies already channeled from the heart, began to collapse as its power source disappeared. The cavern itself, long stabilized by the heart's reality-altering emanations, started to experience structural failures as normal physical laws reasserted themselves. Most significantly, Dagoth-Ur's divine form began to dissolve. Unlike the tribunal, who had maintained separation between their mortal forms and the divinity they drew from the heart, Dagoth-Ur had achieved godhood through fusion with the artifact. As it vanished from Mundus, the foundation of his existence went with it. His physical form did not simply die, but unraveled, divine energies dispersing like mist as the metaphysical framework supporting them disappeared. His final words, spoken as his form dissipated, contained neither anger nor fear but a strange acceptance. How can this be? This is not how it should have ended. Is this your vengeance, Nerevar? Is this how you repay my faith? With Dagoth-Ur's dissolution and the heart's disappearance, the entire heart chamber began to collapse. The Nerevari navigated through falling debris and released energy as Akulakhin broke apart, sections of the massive construct crashing into the chamber floor. The escape through rapidly destabilizing tunnels completed the confrontation that had begun millennia earlier at the dawn of tribunal rule. The metaphysical significance of severing the heart's connection rather than destroying Dagoth-Ur directly extended beyond tactical necessity. This approach represented the fulfillment of Azura's prophecy in its truest sense, not merely defeating an enemy, but correcting the fundamental mistake made after the Battle of Red Mountain. By removing the heart's influence from Mundus, the Nerevarine ended both Dagoth-Ur's corrupted divinity and the tribunal's borrowed godhood, restoring the natural order Nerevar had originally fought to preserve. The aftermath transformed Morrowind's religious and political landscape. As news of the heart's unbinding spread, the effects became immediately apparent. The ghost fence, no longer sustained by Vivek's divine power, began to weaken. Corpus victims throughout Vardenfell found their condition stabilized, not cured, but no longer progressing as the divine energy driving the disease dissipated. Most significantly, the tribunal themselves felt their borrowed divinity fading, forcing them to confront mortality after millennia of godhood. The immediate aftermath of Dagoth-Ur's defeat sent metaphysical shockwaves across Vardenfell. As the Nerevarine emerged from Red Mountain, the most visible sign of change manifested in the blight storms that had plagued the island for decades. The characteristic crimson clouds began to dissipate, their unnatural coloration fading to the ordinary gray-brown of typical ash storms. Observers at Ghostgate documented this transformation, noting how the electrical discharges that had accompanied blight phenomena gradually diminished until only natural volcanic activity remained. House Redoran patrols reported the first ecological changes within weeks. The areas most heavily affected by the blight began a slow recovery process as the divine contamination receded. Plants that had turned gray and brittle gradually regained color, though many species required several growing seasons to fully recover. Water sources previously tainted with reddish sediment began to clear, the metallic taste diminishing as natural filtration processes reasserted themselves without the constant influx of blight particles. Wildlife responded more dramatically to Dagoth-Ur's fall. The aggressive behavior patterns observed in blight-affected creatures subsided, with animals returning to their natural temperaments and territories. Cliff racers, which had displayed unnatural coordination under Dagoth-Ur's influence, reverted to their typical solitary hunting patterns. Nyx hounds shed their additional chitinous plates over time, while Quama colonies stabilized as workers returned to normal size and behavior. Ecological surveys conducted by House Telvanni researchers documented these changes, creating a comprehensive record of recovery that would inform future understanding of divine influence on natural systems. The most significant environmental change concerned Corpus disease. In the days following Dagoth-Ur's defeat, no new cases appeared anywhere on Vardenfell, confirming the direct connection between the disease and its creator. Existing victims, however, experienced varied outcomes. Those in the earliest stages of infection found their symptoms gradually diminishing, eventually disappearing entirely as the divine energy driving the transformation dissipated. For victims in intermediate stages, the disease stabilized, neither progressing nor receding, leaving them permanently altered but no longer degenerating. The most advanced corpus victims, particularly those transformed into specialized forms like ascended sleepers, experienced the most dramatic changes. Without Dagoth-Ur's consciousness directing their development, many of these beings lost coherence, their bodies and minds collapsing as the organizing principle behind their transformation vanished. Others survived but became dormant, retreating to isolated caves and ruins, where they would occasionally be encountered by explorers for decades to come. The Corpusarium under Telfer became the center for studying these outcomes. Divaethfer, whose centuries of research had produced the only known partial cure for Corpus, documented the condition of his guests with meticulous attention to detail. His findings revealed that while the disease's progression had halted, its fundamental alterations to infected flesh remained. Most significantly, the immortality conferred by advanced Corpus persisted. Victims neither aged nor succumbed to conventional diseases, continuing their strange half-life indefinitely. This persistence of Corpus effects, despite Dagoth-Ur's defeat, provided valuable insights into the nature of divine influence on mortal flesh. For his research suggested that once divine energy had fundamentally altered living tissue, these changes became self-sustaining, independent of their original source. This discovery would later influence House Telvanni's approach to flesh-shaping magic and contribute to the development of specialized restoration techniques during the early Fourth Era. Beyond these physical manifestations, the collapse of the Sixth House produced immediate social and political repercussions. Throughout Vardenfell, sleepers and dreamers awakened from Dagoth-Ur's influence, often with little memory of their actions while under his control. Temple authorities established procedures for evaluating these individuals, distinguishing between those who had been unwilling vessels for Dagoth-Ur's consciousness and those who had knowingly served his cause. For the unwilling victims, rehabilitation programs provided support as they reintegrated into society. Many experienced significant psychological trauma, requiring extensive counseling from temple healers. Dreams that had once carried Dagoth-Ur's influence transformed into nightmares of lost identity and violated autonomy. Recovery often took years, with some victims never fully regaining their previous sense of self. Willing cultists faced harsher consequences. Those who had actively participated in Sixth House activities while maintaining awareness of their actions were tried under temple law, with penalties ranging from penitential service to execution for the most serious offenses. These trials revealed the extent of Sixth House infiltration into Vardenfell's power structures, implicating individuals from all great houses and even some temple officials. The political fallout from these revelations contributed to a broader crisis of confidence in established institutions. House Redoran, whose members had generally shown the greatest resistance to Sixth House influence, gained moral authority at the expense of Houses Hlaalu and Telvanni, where corruption had been more prevalent. This shift in inter-house dynamics would accelerate following the subsequent decline of the tribunal, fundamentally altering Morrowind's political landscape. The most profound consequences of Dagoth-Ur's defeat, however, emerged from its effect on the tribunal. With the heart of Lorkhan removed from Mundus, Almalexia, Sothasil, and Vivec lost their source of divine replenishment. Though they retained significant power from previous rituals, this power steadily diminished through use, forcing them to confront the prospect of returning to mortality after millennia of godhood. Each member of the tribunal responded differently to this development. Vivec, perhaps the most philosophically sophisticated of the three, appeared to accept the change with equanimity. He remained in his palace in Vivec City, conserving his remaining divine energy, while preparing his followers for a transition to a temple that would honor the three as saints rather than gods. His writings from this period reflect deep contemplation on the nature of divinity and the responsibilities of leadership in a time of transformation. Sothasil retreated further into his clockwork city, focusing on technological solutions to problems previously addressed through divine power. His communications with the outside world, already infrequent, became even rarer as he worked to preserve his legacy through mechanical rather than metaphysical means. Reports from the few visitors permitted entry to his realm described an accelerated focus on creating self-sustaining systems that could function without his direct oversight. Almalixia's response proved the most destructive. Unable to accept the loss of divinity, she began searching for alternative sources of power to replace the heart. This quest led her to turn against her fellow tribunal members, culminating in her murder of Satha Sil and attempted elimination of the Nerevarine, whom she viewed as responsible for her diminishment. Her eventual defeat in the depths of Mournhold marked the effective end of the tribunal as a governing body, accelerating Morrowind's religious and political transformation. The collapse of tribunal authority created a vacuum that various factions sought to fill. The temple underwent a fundamental reformation, acknowledging the tribunal as saints who had achieved extraordinary status through heroic deeds rather than true gods. This new temple restored the worship of the good Daedra, Azura, Mephala, and Bothaya to prominence while maintaining reverence for Almalixia, Satha Sil, and Vivek as ancestral guides rather than divine beings. This religious shift coincided with increasing imperial influence in Morrowind's affairs. House Lalu, traditionally the most accommodating toward imperial customs, initially gained advantage as imperial resources flowed through their established networks. However, this advantage proved temporary as the empire itself began facing crises that would eventually lead to the Oblivion Crisis and the subsequent dissolution of the Septim Dynasty. The power vacuum created by these concurrent transitions, the fall of Dagoth-Ur, the decline of the tribunal, and the weakening of imperial authority, set the stage for the dramatic events that would reshape Morrowind in the early Fourth Era. Without the tribunal's divine power maintaining the Ministry of Truth, Bardau, in its suspended position above Vivek City, the Moonlit eventually resumed its interrupted fall. The impact created the eruption of Red Mountain known as the Red Year, devastating much of Vardenfell and parts of the mainland. This catastrophe, while not directly caused by Dagoth-Ur, represented the final manifestation of his legacy. The instability he had introduced into Morrowind's metaphysical landscape through his challenge to the tribunal ultimately contributed to the physical destruction of much of the province. The very mountain that had housed his divine ambitions became the instrument of widespread devastation, forcing the Dunmer people to once again reinvent themselves in the face of calamity. The Argonian invasion that followed the Red Year further transformed Morrowind, with southern territories falling to the vengeful forces of Black Marsh. This invasion, made possible by the weakened state of Dunmer society following multiple crises, completed the reshaping of Morrowind's geopolitical position. From a proud, independent province governed by living gods, it became a diminished territory struggling to maintain its cultural identity amid physical destruction and external pressure. Throughout these cascading disasters, elements of Dagoth-Ur's legacy persisted in unexpected ways. The dream verses composed by ash poets continued to circulate among certain segments of Dunmer society, their metaphysical codes influencing artistic and magical developments despite official suppression. The concept of the House Unmourned resonated with Dunmer experiencing displacement and loss, providing a framework for understanding their collective trauma. Most significantly, the philosophical questions raised by Dagoth-Ur's approach to unity and identity informed Dunmer responses to their scattered condition following the Red Year. As refugee communities established themselves in Sky Rim, Cyrodiil, and other provinces, they faced challenges of maintaining cultural cohesion across geographical separation. Some scholars drew explicit parallels between this diaspora situation and Dagoth-Ur's vision of consciousness extended across physical distance, though reinterpreted in non-corrupted forms. House Redoran, which emerged as the dominant political force in post-Red Year Morrowind, incorporated certain elements of Sixth House organizational structure into their approach to governing scattered settlements. The emphasis on dream sharing as a means of maintaining connection across distance, stripped of its corrupting aspects, proved particularly useful for coordinating activities between far-flung Dunmer communities. This pragmatic adaptation of an enemy's techniques represented the Dunmer talent for survival through selective assimilation. By the time of Skyrim's civil war in 4E201, nearly 2 centuries after Dagoth-Ur's defeat, his direct influence had largely faded from Dunmer consciousness. The generation with personal memories of the Blight and Sixth House threat had passed, replaced by Dunmer, whose formative experiences centered on the Red Year and subsequent rebuilding efforts. For these younger Dunmer, Dagoth-Ur existed primarily as a historical figure, a cautionary tale about the dangers of corrupted divinity rather than an immediate threat. Yet subtle echoes of his presence remained. Travelers near Red Mountain occasionally reported dreams featuring a golden masked figure, though these incidents lacked the compelling force of Dagoth-Ur's original dream sending. Expeditions into certain Dwemer ruins discovered ash statues that still emanated faint magical signatures, though without the mind affecting properties of their active counterparts. These remnants suggested that while Dagoth-Ur himself had been defeated, the metaphysical principles he had discovered retained some validity independent of his consciousness. The most enduring aspect of Dagoth-Ur's legacy manifested in Dunmer theological discourse. The questions he had raised about the nature of divinity, the boundaries of individual identity, and the relationship between mortals and gods could not be dismissed simply because their proponent had been defeated. The New Temple's religious scholars engaged seriously with these questions, developing theological frameworks that acknowledged the insights contained within Dagoth-Ur's approach while rejecting its corrupted implementation. This theological engagement produced a more sophisticated understanding of Dunmer's spiritual heritage. Where the Tribunal Temple had presented a relatively straightforward narrative of the three as benevolent deities guiding their people, the New Temple embraced a more complex view that incorporated both Daedric influences and the lessons learned from the rise and fall of mortal-derived divinity. This nuanced approach prepared Dunmer religious thought to weather the challenges of the Fourth Era more effectively than many other faith traditions. As Morrowind slowly rebuilt in the decades following the Red Year, the legacy of Dagoth-Ur served as both warning and inspiration. His fall demonstrated the ultimate futility of attempting to reshape reality through corrupted means, while his temporary successes illustrated the power of vision and determination. The Dunmer who reclaimed and reconstructed their homeland carried this contradictory legacy forward, cautious about the dangers of overreaching ambition, yet emboldened by the knowledge that even the seemingly impossible could be achieved through sufficient will. In the final assessment, Dagoth-Ur's significance extends beyond his role as antagonist in the Nerevarine prophecy. He represents a uniquely Dunmer approach to divinity, neither the borrowed godhood of the Tribunal nor the external power of the Daedra, but something emergent from within that simultaneously transcended and corrupted mortal limitations. His failure ultimately reinforced the Dunmer cultural emphasis on working within established boundaries, while seeking to expand them through knowledge rather than shortcutting the process through dangerous metaphysical experiments. The story of Dagoth-Ur thus concludes not with his physical defeat beneath Red Mountain, but with the integration of his challenge into the evolving identity of the Dunmer people. From the ashes of his ambitions and the subsequent disasters that transformed Morrowind, emerged a culture more resilient, more theologically sophisticated, and more aware of both the possibilities and dangers inherent in their unique relationship with divinity. In this transformation, perhaps the most unexpected aspect of his legacy, Dagoth-Ur achieved a form of the unity he sought, not through the corruption of flesh, but through the incorporation of his story into the collective experience that defines what it means to be Dunmer in a changing world.